Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у щах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страны.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Ті, хто воде всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів. Робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там пивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, everybody. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 205 of the news.
And of course, we're going to be reporting on the past 24 hours in the war in Ukraine. And also, I would like to give a huge shout out, because I've seen this in the live chat, once again to Operator Starsky. Apparently, he just rounded out his live stream for the day, and of course, he gave us a huge plug again. And I would love to say to all of the Lee Spring Army members who may have not heard about our Operator Starsky yet, please go over and check him out. He has been on multiple Sunday fundraisers, helping us to raise funds for nonprofits operating in Ukraine, and he is all around a pretty cool guy. We do talk to him outside of the stream, and he's just a pretty nice guy. So if y'all would like, please go over to Operator Starsky's channel and click the subscribe button, because he's just a pretty cool guy all around. Anyways, moving on from that little aside, we have some pretty big news today in multiple directions. From what we can tell, the Ukrainian counterattacks across the entirety of the front may be in the process of simmering down. However, it's still a fact. It's a proven fact, specifically off of video evidence, that the Russians are still getting obliterated by Ukrainian fire on every single area of the front lines. We can also see that in the casualty reports, and today we have two massive pieces of news that we have to cover. I'll actually give you all a summary of which ones those are, but you know, of course, they'll just be covered later on tonight. First, we've heard of new mass graves in Izyum. Apparently, as far as the latest report went, there is now 1,000 people who have been buried in mass graves in Izyum, making that calamity larger than the Buch Hostomel IRpin massacres that occurred at the very beginning of this war. And also, we'll be discussing the IAEA statement that there should be a demilitarized zone around the nuclear power plant and demanding that Russian forces leave the area. Of course, that's going to come later tonight, but before we get to the unfortunate news at Izyum, I would like to cover the huge successes and exploits of the Ukrainian military today, even as they're starting to scale back their counterattacks and give their military a while to regroup, rearm, and prepare for the next attacks in the next area of the front. Now, before we even get there, I would like to cover a couple of things surrounding Ukraine. So starting off, this one's actually pretty interesting to me. We saw that a Russian missile slammed into a field near Stavropol, Russia. Now, just to give you an idea of Stavropol and where it is, Stavropol is just northwest of Grozny in Chechnya. Not far at all from, I guess you could say, the Caspian Sea, and pretty much in the dead middle of what I call the foot of Russia. What's weird is that this thing is called a Kinzhal ALBM, and if we pull up a Kinzhal missile, you will see that this is the elusive and incredibly famous and feared hypersonic missile that the Russians have touted could hit any target anywhere, so fast that there is no way to counter it or shoot it down. And oddly enough, this missile that you can see on the bottom of what appears to be a MiG-31, which I am correct, is crash landed into the middle of a field in the middle of Russia. Just real quick, we're going to pop over to Twitter. And you can see the remains of this missile. It appears to have not exploded. It appears that the warhead was not armed, and the missile merely slammed into the ground at what I'm assuming was a pretty high speed, maybe not maximum speed, leading it to cause a decent, I guess you could say, dent into the ground and also blasting the thing to pieces.
Это уже движок же с него. Это носовая часть, нет? Движок это? Может, движок, даже не знаю.
You just can't fathom Russian Looney Tunes stupid cartoon crap that they pull off. This is something that you would see in a Wile E. Coyote cartoon where he's using an Acme weapon and it blows up in his face or something. Because how in the world do you accidentally drop or activate, well, not really activate, just drop one of Russia's most expensive and high-tech hypersonic missiles over the middle of Russia, and it just falls into a field and falls apart? How much do these things actually cost, speaking of which? Let's see here. Maximum speed, guidance system. I cannot stand how we can never get just a straight-up cost on these weapons. So let's see here. Kinzhal missile cost. Kinzhal missile cost. How much does a hypersonic missile cost? Some estimate that the lower costing US hypersonic missiles are at only 40 million per missile. Oh my god. That's a lot of money just even for a low-end hypersonic missile. $40 million. In 2021, the Pentagon reported the per unit cost of the Air Force's wait a minute, hang on. That's F-35. Also, F-35 is kind of cheap compared to the Su-35. Anyways, moving on from all of that nitpicking on price, $40 million is the potential cost of the missile that exploded, well, crash-landed into the middle of that field without it even being used on anything. It's just wasted missile and wasted money. Kind of an expensive goof, considering that I believe an Su-25 costs far less than that Kinzhal missile. So let's check that real quick. An Su-25 costs $11 million. And so, to put it into perspective, that single missile would be like 4 Russian Su-25s slamming headfirst into the ground in a single minute. So, with that, that's the end of that little bit of news. And it's great to see that the Russians are incompetent enough that they are using hypersonic missiles against themselves in the special military operation. We're now going to be moving north into the Moscow area, where we've also seen that the Russians are now having to pull out even some of their, I guess you could say, more modern tanks out of storage, but are they really that modern? Let's take a look at it.
Quote unquote, more modern, as they say.
Quote unquote, more modern. For the Russians, more modern is like getting into the bolt action category of service rifles, while everyone else is in the assault rifle category, like the M4. But let's take a look at this video. First, love the sound of dying rats. It sounds like a shopping cart at Walmart. Great thing. We're starting off this video on a high note. And notice this. This is the oddest thing I noticed. Is that these are T-90s. Yet they're missing loads of stuff. Like, let me show you. Let's keep this in mind real quick, Matthew. And let me show you a normal T-90A, which is the most basic version that the Russians actually field of a T-90. So here's a picture of one, I guess you could say this would be a prototypical one, at a Victory Day parade, most likely in 2015. But take a look at this. There are these, I guess you could say, side skirt armor plates that are missing on this T-90. And there's also these little, I call them eyeballs, but what they are IRST jamming devices, which are supposed to jam laser-guided weapons to where they cannot be fired at the T-90. Although those systems are now outdated and completely useless, they're always equipped on the T-90s. And these T-90s in this video are missing that as well. In fact, it's just missing loads of stuff. It just looks like
this is the budget version, the great value.
This is the Lada Niva of the T-90 world right here. It's the
basically,
base model, without the cup holders or anything. But it's still incredibly odd to see this dying rat tank with nothing on it. That's the end of the video, but still, this is something to note. The Russians are now pulling out T-90s out of storage, and we can see that their armor situation is so bad they've lost all of their actual operational and up-to-spec main battle tanks, to the point that they're now pulling out T-90s that you can clearly tell are incomplete in multiple ways and just missing basic things that are on almost every other T-90. It's a very interesting thing, and I hope to see these T-90s on the front line soon, because if any T-90 is going to be the most beneficial for Ukraine, it's probably going to be this underperforming one that really looks like a T-72 on steroids. And so with that, we're now going to be moving into Moscow itself, and oh buddy, there was someone who actually said a couple of days ago, I look forward to the Russia Today news segment every single night, because we just sit here and roast Russia Today, or any Russian state media agency, for the entire clip. And we got it back. The Russians are now saying on TV, and keep in mind, it's against the law in Russia to call the special military operation a war. They're now calling it an outright war on TV. Of course, keep in mind, Starsky and all of us talked about this before, this may be scripted, but at the same time, it may not be, because we do know that everything in Russia isn't always scripted. That's why there's currently a petition circling around Russia where politicians are signing off on it and demanding that Russia removes Putin or Putin steps down from office. So without further ado, here's the video.
Фаза
And also, I'm going to have to mute it because I just realized y'all aren't going to be able to read the subtitles at the bottom. So, with that, let's start it off again. The phase of us conducting a special operation. While Ukraine and the entire West waged a powerful hybrid war is over. Today, we need to understand the real war is starting, and he should be arrested at this point based off of Russian law. Calling it a war is just out of the picture. Also, Matthew, notice this woman at the bottom right corner of the screen. I don't know about you, but she looks blitzed. It looks like she
does. She looks angry as hell, too.
And she looks like she may be like coked out or something, because look at her facial expressions throughout this whole video. They're almost like detached in a way. It's kind of weird.
Hey, if you were a journalist on this news channel, you'd be coked out too.
Probably. Not gonna lie, I probably would be. We can't show mercy to anyone any longer like they have been. I always don't understand where the Russians are coming from with these kinds of statements. They're always acting like they're this benevolent, kind force, but the war has shown us that they're nothing but. And then they still go off of phrases like, it's time for us to not be kind anymore and time for us to get tough. Like, you've been tough the whole time. It's not like you've been holding any punches. It's just that your punches are like the equivalent of a prepubescent kid trying to punch a grown man. The world we thought we were coming to liberate, thinking we would come to Kyiv and other cities. They were waiting for us and would welcome us. Just look at who is fighting in the east. The same Russian world, they were brainwashed. We have to change our own perception, with which we entered into this special operation. All of them are fighting against us. Boo-hoo. We don't need to think about whom we can protect. I don't think they've been thinking about that anyways. Also, what in the world is this Quentin Tarantino cut right here in the middle of the news segment? This stuff is like from the death of Stalin, when they would introduce a new character. They would have like some kind of intro card pop up. What in the world was this? Look at this. What in the world is in the middle of him talking?
And then this side, we have this guy right here. He's going to fight a honey badger today.
You know, honestly, what this looks like? This looks like an NFL draft thing right here.
It does. It's like, what is in Russian here? Is it like stats on his weight and height and all that stuff?
Probably. It's some kind of quote. And also it says down here at the bottom something else, but unfortunately, I can't read Russian. But anyways, he says, we need to protect Russia. We need to save our people. And to do everything possible to destroy the West. Oh boy, here they go with that old line of reasoning again. Isn't every single country that has a problem in the world, don't they always blame the West? It's always the North Koreans, the Chinese, the Iranians, and the Russians. They're almost always blaming the entire West as a whole. And I just gotta say this for Russia. Why in the world can they just not do something stupid like this and then act like it's everyone's fault? They went into this war voluntarily. They could have let Ukraine join NATO, and they could have done nothing about it, and they would have been fine. Yet they didn't. They went into this war. Now they're being screwed over because the rest of the world's supporting Ukraine. And now they want to act like that's the world's fault, that they're supporting Ukraine and supporting their interests because Russia wanted to do something else and hates them already. Doesn't make any sense. Which today is forming units, training that army, supplying them with weapons. That guy looked the most disinterested. Oh my god.
That guy is soulless.
Have you ever seen the face of death, Vladimir?
My goodness.
Oh my god. Golly. The other woman looks like she may be quaaluded out. This man here has seen death and laughed or something, because this guy has nothing left in him. His soul is gone. Supplying them with weapons. We have reached that phase now. This is no longer a hybrid war. This is a real, open, modern war. We have to be ready for it, and y'all aren't. Russian people with whom... Oh, no, look, the dead man's now talking. Russian people are demanding victory. This victory has to be achieved at any cost. Russian people demand harsh, immediate actions. There are announcements that Ursula von der Leyen is planning a visit to Kyiv. I sincerely hope that when she shows up there, Kyiv and the Kyiv region will be plunged into darkness. We need to strike Ukraine's critical infrastructure, which forms the core of Zelensky's regime. Yes, because without electricity, Zelenskyy fades away. What in the world's the point of that statement? Without electricity, the regime falls. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, too. They're just grabbing at straws now. Well, good lord, that line went by quickly. In terms of its economical and defensive potential, the time has come. We can't keep waging war in white gloves. We need decisive and demonstrative actions in order to solve this problem. Undermining Ukraine's military and economic potential is the most important goal, without which we can't achieve a victory in our special operation. Now they're back to calling it a special operation. In order for us to win, we need to understand the enemy's mindset. Until we understand his worldview, he would be very difficult to defeat. I don't think they'll ever understand the Ukrainian worldview, because their view surrounds freedom and sovereignty, which is something the Russians don't understand. So I don't think they'll ever be able to win just off of the minds and hearts idea that this guy's got alone. Here's how Americans think. Either you break another victor's spine and win, or you prove to him that you're his equal. Otherwise, you're a nobody. This is the logic of their worldview. Now, wait a minute. Wait a minute, you just talked on behalf of the entire United States. What in the world? That's not how we think at all. We just are always against the Russians because the Russians have always wished death and hellfire on us. That's the only reason we're against them.
I like how they pull a clip of CNN to put on their channel.
Yeah, I was looking at that too. I was about to say something about it, but I was just going to let it slide. But now, back to our special operation. Take a look at how they see us. As we look at Mosul, they believe that if you can't do that to your enemy, you're a nobody. What in the world's he talking about? If you can't do that, you're a coward and a loser.
What is that?
I don't even know what he's meaning. Is he saying that the United States thinks that you have to utterly decimate a city in order to look like a winner and a somebody? Because I think the whole entire thing that surrounded Mosul is that everyone here in the United States was completely appalled by what happened there and thought it was atrocious. And now the Russians are saying, you see, the West, they just want death and destruction. They want a whole city leveled. And even during this war, we've watched the Russians level city after city, and we've sat here and said, that is the most messed up thing we've ever seen. And now the Russians are saying that that's what we want. We just demand bloodshed as a country. And here's another thing real quick, because I know that there's always a small group of people out there who are always saying, Enforcer, don't talk too much about the Russians and, you know, how I guess you could say evil their military is and their government, because that kind of dehumanizes, I guess you could say, their military and the people in it, because not all of them are bad. But look at the Russian state TV. You would never see this, even though I hate the mainstream news in the United States, you would never see this on a channel like Fox or CNN, where they just outright said, Russians are savage, bloodthirsty, subhuman people who just want folks to die all over the place. You would never see that. Well, I've never really seen it. I don't watch a lot of the mainstream news. I haven't really seen it. Yet here's the Russians saying exactly that on their state TV channels. And that was a civilian neighborhood, what's left of it. On February 24th, they waited for us to do that to key cities in Ukraine, and you did. Then they would have said, those guys are strong. We shouldn't mess with them. Actually, no. We actually saw them level cities, and then we said, these guys are sick. We need to stop them. And that's what led us to getting heavily involved in Ukraine, is seeing the atrocities that the Russians were committing on a daily basis. And here's this guy living in a fantasy world, like he's never seen Mariupol or Lysychansk, and talking about, oh, if we had leveled a city, no one would mess with us if we just killed tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. Whether we like or dislike this way of thinking, it is what it is. That's how they see the world. This guy's just delusional. We have to take that into account. When will they start to respect us? Never. When they see their dead soldiers in Ukraine, only then will they again start to respect us. What? You know,
that is insanity.
That is insanity, and I don't like to use harsh words or strong words, but I think the only dead people we've seen in Ukraine are Russian soldiers, so I don't think we'll ever see any Americans there. And also, one more thing, the Russians, and this is something that the Russians have always touted, and I think that there may be some people out there who still believe that the Russian military is strong and capable of actually fighting the United States toe-to-toe. If the United States went to war with Russia in a conventional war, that war would end up looking like the Gulf War on the highway of death. Hardly any U.S. soldiers would probably be killed. We would obliterate the Russians from the air alone, and then the army would roll through and sweep up what's left and take prisoners. That's most likely how it would occur. I don't even know why the Russians try and keep up this stupid dog and pony show propaganda trick where they act like their military can actually inflict damage on anyone, because they can't even inflict damage on a smaller population and a smaller economic power in Europe like Ukraine. It shows that
Enforcer, look at the stupidity of what they're saying. They're literally saying, if we commit some more war crimes, our enemy will respect us. That is insane.
That's exactly what they're saying, and it's the sickest thing ever. And they pretend like they haven't committed war crimes yet. And this clip is on the wake of the Ukrainians finding mass graves in Izyum. 400 to 1,000 Ukrainian citizens killed by Russians. And they're going to sit there and act like they've never committed a war crime. We know that these hundreds of people in Izyum had to have been killed over the entirety of the occupation of the city. And the Russians pretend like that didn't happen. They haven't even committed a war crime yet. And they're just going to start doing that now for respect purposes. Oh, sorry, everyone. I was looking at the live chat for a second. Sorry about that.
Whoops.
But anyways, back to this. Including the footage we're seeing right now. Strikes against objects of the critical infrastructure should have been done earlier. We've been saying that. The worst thing for us to do would be to think that our time is unlimited. To conduct our new special military operation, this is of course reminiscent of World War I, but World War I is not the best example in our history, neither is really any war in their history. If you look through the whole entire thing, the Russians just got lambasted in every single war. Let's go over them. Afghanistan, World War II, they would win World War II, but at what cost? 30 million dead just from their country alone. They lost World War I, that led to the Soviet Union coming into being. Let's see, they lost the Crimean War. They lost every single time they ever fought in the Napoleonic Wars. They lost, I mean, like, hell, you can't ever think of a time in Russian history where they won anything without losing almost half of their country's population to do it. And so, if this guy's going to try and pull a good example from Russian history, we're going to be here for a long time, because there is no good example. As well as the art of war in general, like they have any idea. We've been demonstrating humanism for a very, very long time. But the time for humanism is over. Regarding what needs to be done, as I've said before, the strikes against the infrastructure, the civilian and military infrastructure, can't be separated. Like they've been making a dissertation between the two already. They strike civilians more than the military. And now they're acting like, well, we can't just target the military. We're gonna have to target the civilians too now. Like there's been a difference before. And once again, like Matthew said, here they are, encouraging war crimes to be committed by the Russian military on TV with no remorse whatsoever. In fact, they are eager to get to committing more war crimes. It's almost like they're asking for it. If all of Ukraine is plunged into cold darkness, if there's no railway communication, no fuel, and nothing else, then no one can supply any reserves, ammo, or fuel. Not to the front line or... Gosh, this guy talks fast. Not to the front line or along the front line. They should be conducted for 2, 3, 5, or 6 months. So that there is not one fueling station left intact. I think the audience is in horror from what they're hearing right now, that every infrastructure object should be leveled. While you can't separate civil versus military infrastructure, if you're going to call for everything to be leveled, It's time to admit that the talk about a brotherly nation was deceitful. Otherwise, stop calling for such things. When some are trying to incite the panic about losing part of the Kharkiv region, it's like a cat when he caught a mouse. When he plays with it, it may start to run away. And everyone thinks, cat, are you not seeing that? It ran away. But the cat knows he can grab it any time. Kharkiv will be ours and all of Ukraine will be ours, and Europe will swear allegiance to us. Calm down. Everything will be fine, God willing. This is our new reality. We should act fast, be harsh and uncompromising. First of all, we have to scale up the strikes against Ukraine's critical infrastructure, so that region after region, district after district, we plunge Ukraine into darkness. This is an enemy nation. Our goal is to step up our strikes in such a way that by December, 20 million Ukrainians will flee from the territories where they now live and travel west to the European Union. We need to complete this goal and this task. Perhaps we should openly tell them, leave. Zelenskyy is turning this area into real hell. I thought he just said that they were going to do that. No, wait a minute. What in the world? That's a sickle and a hammer.
It is. What the hell?
This guy's just a literal commie on TV.
No shame about it either.
Yeah, just clearly on the suit. No one knows what will happen here next. 20 million go to Europe. Region after region. Well, this guy said that about 5 times now. He said that about the third time. We should act accordingly. There are time-tested recipes of history, and the Russians have never got one right, which the righteousness of our victory demands that we undertake. We only forward to victory. It's time to act. What in the world have they been doing for the past 7 months then? Just playing? Like, you don't lose 55,000 soldiers just playing around. You lose them because you're actually trying to achieve something, and yet you're getting obliterated by the Ukrainians. And suffice it to say, we're not going to go over that too much longer. Just wanted to give you all a good slice of Russian stupidity again before we move on into the rest of the news for the night. And you can see that Russian stupidity is about as alive and strong as ever before. We're now going to be moving down to Greece, which is not really a big fan of Russian stupidity, and in fact is giving over some of its BMP-1s to Ukraine. It came a little bit of a surprise to me that Greece, which has almost always been a NATO member, has BMP-1s. I don't know when in the world they got these and acquired them, but apparently they've had them for some while. They're now going to be giving 40 BMP-1s to Ukraine, and the German Ministry of Defense has stated that in I guess you could say goodwill with this deal, they will be sending Greece 40 Marder infantry fighting vehicles to replace the Greek BMPs. A great sign of goodwill from the Greeks, and of course, it's a little questionable though. That's one thing I do have to say.
Now, Enforcer, isn't Greece the country that was having economic difficulty a while back?
Yes, they are actually the country that famously went bankrupt.
That's actually a really big deal that they're sending equipment since they have such financial difficulty.
It is a big deal, but the one thing about the Greeks is that they've promised a decent amount in this war, especially for a country that is in economic straits like they are. However, almost none of it, somewhere around 5% of what they have pledged, has actually ended up in Ukraine at this point. So whether these BMPs will ever arrive in Ukraine is unknown. Statistically, it's highly unlikely, but I do have high hopes. The Greeks are, of course, on the side of the West, on the side of NATO. They are a NATO member, and I hope that these BMPs do find their way onto Ukrainian battlefields to help out the soldiers, which still are focusing on pushing the Russians back out of Ukraine and liberating these areas from these Russian tyrants. And so with that, we're now moving on to our final bit of news for the night that's from the international area, and this is, once again, another great argument for revoking Russian visas. I know that this is a very contentious debate, and of course, I'm perfectly fine with everyone discussing civilly, please don't get into fights in the live chat with each other, civilly, about whether Russian visas should be revoked or not, and if there can be a compromise in between. But we saw today that Russian, I guess you could say, vandalism has taken an extra step up in Barcelona. we saw that Russians went to the Cathedral of Barcelona, a very beautiful cathedral, which I'll actually show y'all for a second, so that way it's not just a place in the middle of nowhere. So let me go find it. Let's see, it is somewhere in this area. It's south of here. Here we go. The Cathedral of Barcelona. You see it right there. There's a 3D view.
That's pretty cool.
Of the cathedral. Yeah, that's actually really neat. I didn't know they did that. That's actually pretty freaking neat. I'm really surprised that they did something like that. Anyways, the Russians have decided to vandalize this beautiful historic structure by painting Z's all over the base of it. Here's the video showing the defamation of a cathedral in Barcelona, in Spain, with Z's. You can see a Z right there on the wall of the cathedral. You can see Z's on the staircases that are leading up to the cathedral. Z's on the actual buttresses themselves.
Now that's disgusting to do that to a cathedral.
It is. It really is. Now, regardless whether you're religious or not, a cathedral, in my opinion, deserves a high level of protection. Cathedrals, in their time, were the most expensive and technologically advanced buildings that Europeans could build. There was no other building in that time of history that was as impressive as these. And so, in the modern world, I believe that they deserve as much protection as a national government can provide and as the locality can provide as well. And to see that Russians would go up to such a beautiful and magnificent structure such as this and deface it by painting Z's all over it is just sick. It's incredibly sick. And once again, it shows Russia's contempt for history and legacy, which is just a sickening thing, really, to think that to Russians, nothing is valuable. We know that they don't find life valuable because they'll kill civilians regardless of if they're involved in military operations or not. They'll go and kill themselves by the tens of thousands. They'll just pump them into a meat grinder and lead them to get killed. They will even treat their own civilians in their home front like garbage. And then on top of that, they don't even care about any of their cultures, traditions, or history. They'll just go around and go, oh, look, it's a beautiful cathedral. This is the perfect building to try and vandalize. And so with that, that's the end of that video. And if y'all would like to have an argument, well, not an argument at all. Let me make sure to clarify that. If y'all would like to have a discussion about whether Russian visas should be revoked or not, please feel free to talk with each other in the chat about that. But once again, I would like to make a disclaimer that on this stream, where I'm perfectly okay with people disagreeing with me and people disagreeing with each other, as long as you keep it civil. There's no reason to be rude about anything. At the end of the day, if you're rude to someone else or if someone's rude to you, it's not really going to change anything. So just make sure to be polite if you do discuss anything in the live chat or address anything at me, because, you know, why not keep it civil? It's just a nice thing to do. And so with that, we're now going to be moving into Ukraine to start covering our location unknowns and also the Kharkiv news, specifically the news around Kupiansk and Kharkiv itself. But before we get to those, we're going to answer 3 questions from the chat and also address some of our polls. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
It's time. It's time, folks, for the first question segment of the stream, and we have 2 polls to address. And the first one said, do you think that there will be more mass graves discovered by Ukraine? Now, sadly, this is somewhat of a morbid poll, but it looks like 96% of you said sadly, most likely. Only 3% said maybe, we need more info, and 1% said no, there will likely not be more. So very unfortunate results in the poll, but sadly, I will have to agree, because I doubt that the ones that were just found are the only ones, because Buch was the other one. So I'd imagine there are probably a lot more, sadly. But Enforcer, what are your thoughts?
I would have to say it's a certainty that more mass graves will be found. We already know of mass graves outside of Mariupol, which are in the span of tens of thousands of civilians that were killed during that battle. And it would be safe to assume that there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, that have been killed in Melitopol, in Kherson, and other cities around the country that are still occupied by the Russians. We can see that everywhere that Ukrainian forces have been able to roll back through and liberate, that there has always been an atrocity to some degree and some level that has been perpetrated by the Russians. And I believe that the Ukrainian military should make sure to put in the maximum amount of effort to find the Russians that committed these crimes and hold them accountable. And considering the severity and the emergency of this situation, maybe frontline justice should be had. Although that's a question for another time and starting to enter a very questionable field. But when we cover this news in a bit about Izyum, it's almost a straw that broke the camel's back for me. Because I was thinking for a while after the Ukrainians liberated Izyum, I was like, oh, thank God, they didn't find any atrocities that the Russians committed on a massive scale there, and hopefully not a lot of people died. And then this came out today, and it proves that everywhere the Russians have been, every single city that they've taken, they are committing unbelievable amounts of atrocities in every single one of them. And also, real quick, let me show you all this and explain this. Population of Izyum. Izyum has a population of 46,000 people. That means that if there are 1,000 people who were buried in a mass grave from Izyum alone, in that one place, statistically, that means, well, let me make sure I get this correct, that they have killed 2% of Izyum's total population over the past few months through war crimes. And that puts it into perspective how bad these really are, because 1,000 doesn't sound like a lot, honestly. It doesn't sound like much at all, because, 1,000 people almost die every day in this war on the front lines. It doesn't sound like a lot, but when you put it into perspective of how big Izyum is as a town, and how many people that just wiped out of their city's population, then it's a glaring problem. It's a glaring situation. 2%, 3% of all Ukrainian citizens who have been in occupied territories could have been killed by war crimes at this point. And there is no way for us to know until Ukrainian forces roll back through and liberate these areas. And so I'm very certain that there will be more mass graves as the Ukrainians continue to take more ground. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next poll, and I hope I addressed that one fairly well.
All right. And the next poll said, do you think the charged rhetoric is a lead up to the use of a weapon of mass destruction? It looks like 26% said yes, it appears so. 30% said maybe, but not really sure. And 44% said no, this is normal on Russian TV. And on this one, I would have to agree with the 44%. While I do think it's possible that a weapon of mass destruction could be used simply because Putin is getting pushed back so hard, and he's a guy of very egotistical sort, and he doesn't like to be humiliated, so he might decide to use something as dastardly as a nuke. I don't think that the rhetoric on the Russian TV is really a true indicator of that. But Enforcer, what are your thoughts?
I think that the Russian state TV is just playing to its audience, and think about this real quick. Even though Russian state TV is operated by the Russian government, everything revolves around viewership and ratings. And so apparently they must get a massive amount of ratings running stuff like that on state TV. Or it's the Russian government telling them what to show, and regardless of the ratings, they run the show. It could be either one, but I'm leaning more so in the area of the Russian government is telling them to do this, and also it brings in ratings, which could tell us that a lot of Russians really do like that kind of talk. However, one thing that we've seen throughout this war, because we've seen it for months now, is that the Russians are always talking about, oh, we're going soft on the Ukrainians, we're just holding back, give it another few weeks, and we're really going to give it to them. We're just going to take the whole country in 2 weeks. And it's never happened. So to me, that honestly just seems like normal hype talk, and I don't think it'll amount to much of anything rather than the Russians being embarrassed in about another few months. And so with that, I hope I've addressed that poll fairly well. And with that, I think that was our last poll, and if it was, we're now going to move on to answer 3 questions from the chat.
And yes, that was our last poll, so moving right along to our Super Chat questions. Up first, we have a $100 donation from Walter A. Lakota Jr., who says, Aloha, Enforcer and Enforcer Matt, and LSA from Bosun, LSN from Dutch Harbor, Alaska. Russia must be in a lot of problems, because for about 7 to 8 weeks, the USNS Loyal hasn't even seen any Russian Navy Far East.
Interesting. Real quick, Matthew, can you spell out the name of that town to me real quick?
Dutch Harbor, Alaska?
Oh, Dutch Harbor, Alaska. I thought you said Bosun. I was like, let's see.
I think that's his position, I think.
Well, sorry about that real quick. I got that mixed up apparently. But also, something interesting is that it says Dutch Harbor, Unalaska, Alaska. What?
Unalaska. So is it not Alaska?
Unalaska. Yeah, that's
I'm just
weird.
joking, by the way. I don't think I think it still is Alaska, but it's called Unalaska.
Apparently, Unalaska is the chief center of population in the Aleutian Islands. Interesting. Why is it called Unalaska, though? That's very odd. But still...
They didn't want to be a part of Alaska.
But still, I do thank you. Someone, hang on 1 second. 1 second, y'all. Sorry, my control board is getting messed up right now, so give me just a second.
I think I see the deadliest catch boat out there.
I think I do. But also, now that I've refreshed my control room, now everything on my end is completely gone. So, real quick, to try and address that the best I can,
boy.
I was actually going to try and read it. But can you reread that to me real quick, man, just to make sure I know it before I actually say anything about it?
Yes. So Walter said, Aloha, Enforcer and Enforcer Matt, and LSA from Bosun LSN from Dutch Harbor, Alaska. Russia must be in a lot of problems because for about 7 to 8 weeks, the USNS Loyal hasn't seen any Russian Navy far east.
USNS Loyal. Let's take a look at the USNS Loyal. Oh, it's one of those. It's one of those weird ships. This
What
thing
is it? Catamaran? It's not the proper term, I don't think. But
I think it is called something like a catamaran or something similar to that, but it's a surveillance ship, I believe. They call it a research vessel. Oh, there it is. It says ocean surveillance ship. These things are just so freaking weird, but they're cool. I really like them. That's also interesting to hear as well, is that it hasn't spotted a single Russian naval ship anywhere in the east, in the Pacific, and that's good. That's real good. That means that the Russians must be suffering in every regard, even logistically with their navy, and so they can't even have them go on normal patrols, or I guess I could say normal voyages without massive problems incurring. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. Also, I saw that you threw in 2 super chats, and so thank you so much for the massive amount of support. And I hope we've been able to address that one fairly well. And also, it sounds like he said he was in the Lee Spring Navy.
yes.
How about we make you Admiral of the Pacific Fleet of the Lee Spring Navy? How about that?
He just got a huge promotion.
He just got a huge promotion. Actually, we'll call him, let's see. We got to think of a Lee Spring Army title for that, because we always try and come up with something that's a little bit more creative than just the normal ranks, like we have Inquisitors, Wardens, and Enforcers. Not the Enforcer. The Enforcer is just me, but there are Enforcers, and Arbiters and other things. But I'll try and come up with a cool title for you, because that is pretty cool to know that you are in the U.S. Navy, and also at this tiny little town of Dutch Harbor. And also, I think this is where the deadliest catch boats come sometimes.
I think so. Dutch Harbor, I think, is their port.
I think it may be, and you can see a couple of fishing ships down here at this port. But anyways, with that, I hope that addresses the question fairly well, and thank you so much once again for the massive amount of support. It helps our channel to keep on running, so that way we can talk about these things in the question segments. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we do have a second super chat from Walter, who puts in another very generous $100 donation and says, once more, I think he says the exact same thing, but he says at the very end, been out to sea for 7 to 8 weeks and no Russian Far East Navy at all. They must be having major problems.
And once again, thank you for the support, and I would have to agree, they must be having major problems. As far as I understand, the Russian Far East Fleet is based at Vladivostok. Let's look around the harbor real quick and make sure. God, man, I don't know what it is with Russian cities, but they always look like apocalyptic hellscapes, even from space. My God, look at this. Would you want to live here, Matthew? Like,
That looks like a wasteland.
it does. Let's look at this on the ground. Oh, God. This place looks awful. Especially with the barbed wire, it really adds to the feeling that you're trapped here and it's a hellscape. Oh,
That's like where
God.
they take people to take permanent naps.
Yeah, I mean, like, what's up with all this sandy-looking stuff on the ground? Like, golly, this place looks like hell. I couldn't live here. What's odd, though, is that when you get on the ground, there's trees and things here. But when you look at it from space, maybe it's snow? It may be snow, but it looks like it's just covered in... It's snow. Yeah, it's snow. But let's go into the harbor here and let's take a look, because I think the Russian Far East Fleet is here in Vladivostok. But I just want to make sure real quick. Let's see, they got this. That is definitely a Russian frigate. So we're going to move on a little bit more and see where we can find their moorings. And here they are. Nope, wait a minute. Yep, these are probably Russian ships. This one has a helipad on the back, so it's making me assume maybe some kind of a frigate. These are certainly Russian warships right here. And so this is the basing point for the Far East Fleet, I would assume. And going off of that and seeing that you and the entire United States Navy has not seen them in operation for months on end, that tells us that logistically the Russians are putting all of their efforts and manpower into just trying to keep the Ukraine war running and the Black Sea Fleet somewhat afloat, although a lot of their ships have gone under. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that addresses that comment fairly well. And also, thank you so much for serving in the U.S. Navy and also providing us with a little bit of information that I had not heard about until this point. And so with that, we are on to, I believe, the last one of this segment. And thank you so much once again.
And yes, this is the last one of the segment. And this one goes to John Dameron, who puts in a $50 donation and says, Enforcer, it's starting to get colder at night in Ukraine. I've heard Russians have no cold weather gear in the south. How long do you think they will continue to hold Kherson?
Well, I thank you so much for the support. It helps us out a massive deal. And to get to that question, the Russians have not, as far as we've seen, been supplied with winter gear. I don't think the Ukrainians have begun to disperse the winter gear, although I have heard that Western countries have been supplying them with winter gear, and also the Ukrainians have been attempting to procure or produce their own. So, as far as I know, the Ukrainians will be fairly ready for the winter. There's almost really no way to perfectly prepare for it. It's always going to be very tough on a military for it to try and conduct winter operations. But the Russians, as far as we can see, they're not getting ready at all. We haven't even heard any reports or seen any evidence of them getting or using winter gear already, and it is getting colder. With this in mind, I think if the Russians started to run out of, I guess you could say, soldiers that could survive the harsh elements, it most likely would be around January or February, nearing the end of winter, when everything would start to collapse. I believe in Battle of Stalingrad timetables, that would have been about the time that the German army surrendered then, and that's because they can hang on throughout most of the winter, but it's that last month or two. Yep, it was the 2nd of February when the Germans surrendered. I think it was the 6th Army, but yeah, we won't get into that exact detail on Stalingrad. Anyways, it's usually that last month or two of winter, January and February, when it becomes the most difficult. The military has suffered massive rates of attrition at that point. The supply lines have completely fallen apart. The soldiers are starving. They're freezing. And then that's when usually the opposing side will conduct some kind of encirclements or some kind of a offensive, and then just obliterate the sickened and dying forces that are still there, to the point that they'll most likely just surrender. So I would see Kherson falling, just based off of the elements and how the Russian army will most likely fare, in between January and February, if the Ukrainians aren't actively trying to retake Kherson in the meantime. So with that, thank you so much once again for the massive amount of support, and I hope I was able to answer that question fairly well. But of course, everyone's favorite dish in the Ukrainian, well, not the Ukrainian army, in the Lee Spring army, is a grain of salt. Grain of salt. Let's go and look at a grain of salt. There it is. It's a delicacy in the Lee Spring army. This grain of salt, which I pull out almost every single time I answer a question. But once again, while I do cover the news, I don't know everything. And sometimes I will just say I don't know about it and declare ignorance. But I don't know everything. So please, although I tried to state my opinions as clear as I could, take it with a grain of salt. Because I could be correct, and I also could be wrong. Only time will tell whether I was correct or not. And so with that, we're now going to move on from that question segment and into our next bit of news, starting off at the location unknowns. And the first clip we saw today was Russians, of course, being hit again. Also, there's music, but we can see a Ukrainian soldier, of course, using a DJI Mavic drone controller, and also using an iPad-sized device. I don't even know what that is. It kind of looks like an iPad. We can see Russians running for the truck. We can also see a Russian shooting at the drone, but it looks like, although he fired a whole magazine of ammo, he couldn't hit it once. We now see the bomb landing right down on top of him. And also, what kind of bomblet was that, Matthew? Look at that thing. It's like a Nerf football.
Yeah, I was about to say that too. It's like styrofoam looking.
Yeah, it's like styrofoam. But that thing packs a little punch. Gosh. Imagine at the end of the war they get the Nerf footballs mixed up with these, and you throw them to your friend, and it just explodes. We now see them dropping a more, I guess you could say, Nerf football-y shaped grenade down onto Russian forces, hitting a vehicle in the tree line,
Ooh,
rocking
that
the
one packed
trees.
a punch.
We can also see them dropping another, and they are all packing a punch. To be such small bombs, they're doing a decent amount of damage. And so with that, that's the end of the video, and it's nice to see that the Ukrainians have now weaponized the Nerf football, and they're using those against the Russians. Once again, Ukrainian ingenuity has been through the roof in this war. Who would have ever thought that drones, we saw drones used before in war. We saw it used during 2014 to 2022 in Ukraine, hardly. We saw them get used a little bit more in the Armenian and Azerbaijani war in 2020, which is also, I believe, called the Nagorno-Karabakh War of 2020, and then we saw them used now. But I would say that now is the time that we've seen the most prolific use of drones in any single war. Moving on from that, we can also see a Russian tank being hit, once again, on a drone camera. When you see the drone looking at the Russian vehicle, and the Ukrainian mortar fire is now starting to come down around it.
There's something going on right there.
There's something interesting going on here. What is...
Looks like somebody's flailing around or something.
Oh, well, I would say they're more so having a party down there. We're now going to skip forward on that a little bit. We can now see mortars blanketing the area. And with that, that's the end of the video. And Matthew said something there that I would like to clarify. Of course, we don't show anything on the stream that's questionable. That was just someone who was having a fun time watching a video down there and just reacting to it. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next clip, which of course it's always interesting to see the Ukrainian mortar fire being so accurate, where you see that a Ukrainian BTR-4 is at it again. We're starting to see these a lot more, and especially inside the BTRs themselves. And so without further ado, here's a video of a Ukrainian BTR-4 firing at the Russians in the distance. What in the world do they have in there? A football team?
Really?
It sounded like a whole stadium's inside this BTR-4. Jeez! I love it, though. I love the enthusiasm. But how many guys do they have in this thing? We see that they got done cheering and celebrating after the destroyed tank, and also clapped a little. This is a hype tank right here. Yes. Everyone inside of it is just hyped out to all get out. And I see the BTR rolling forward again. Also, this man, much like I do now, is hydrating. It's important to stay hydrated while obliterating orcs. I gotta tell you this, man. Honestly, this feels like game night at a friend's house when you're all gathered around the Xbox playing a game. This is what this feels like right here.
It really does. Drinking a little water,
Yeah,
having some fun.
It's crazy how war has evolved, especially in the one we're watching now, to the point that some aspects of it are almost like a video game. It's just incredibly weird because you can get the same kind of experience on a lot of games. There's one I play often called War Thunder, and the infrared camera and the way it feels is probably very similar to how this gunner feels, just sitting there looking through a screen, a display, tilting around some controls on the controller, firing off a couple of rounds, and that's it. And you just got a whole bunch of guys behind you just cheering you on like you're playing a game. It's really weird to think that war has gone in this direction. It's almost surreal when you really think about it that way. It's like, wow, you can actually simulate war in some aspects, not all of it. You can't really simulate the aspect of being an infantryman at all still, but some others, like being a tanker or an APC operator, you can almost get right into the action at home on a computer with a very realistic like game.
Enforcer, can you imagine what their ping rate is?
Oh, it must be good. So with that, that's the end of the video, and it's pretty interesting to see the Ukrainians once again operating a BTR-4 and apparently taking out the Russians pretty effectively. With that, we're now on to the next video where you can see the Ukrainians bombarding the Russians again. And also, with our favorite ringer, literally a ringer, an SPG-9. And we can also see it using the exact same rounds as the BMP-1 that we saw in Operation the other day, where the Ukrainian almost spilled his coffee. There's the ringing. He now loads another round into the breach. There's the ringing again. That ringing is so distinct. And they are just pumping out the rounds on this thing. Jeez. With that, that's the end of the video, but it's really interesting to see them using these SPG-9s to such a great effect, and also at such a high rate of fire. It may as well just be a light infantry mortar with that kind of speed. And so with that, that's the end of the video, and huge credit again to the Ukrainian Armed Forces, which are going above and beyond with their performance, and I guess you could say their endurance. With that, we're now moving on to our next video, where you can see the Ukrainians getting a pretty nice shot in. Oh, man. Well,
we took it down.
Sadly, we can't watch that video, but it was a very good shot. I'll explain it real quick. A Ukrainian drone was looking down at an abandoned Russian BMP from about 100 to 200 feet above it, dropped a bomblet, and went straight through the gunner's hatch and exploded in the BMP, causing it to brew up and then burn out. So, unfortunately, we won't be able to see that video, so we're going to move on to the next one, where we then saw a sign. It's a sign! It literally is a sign, and the Ukrainians are throwing Molotovs at it. And here's why. The sign says that the Ukrainians and Russians are one people. They're pretty much the same. And you see that this Ukrainian soldier has a problem with that.
Хорошо.
That was a solid hit right there. It was nice to see the gas just kind of like spread across the canvas right there. But with that, that's the end of the video, and it's good to see that the Ukrainians are making sure to take down propaganda in a very nice and civil way. And I highly encourage, if you see any Russian propaganda in your area, if you are Ukrainian, please make sure to always go and have it cleared out. Maybe if it's like on the side of a building, maybe not throw a Molotov at it, but just go up with a scraper and just scrape the thing off or something similar. And so with that, we're now moving on to our final bit of Location Unknown news for the night, where we can see that Finland provided arms and equipment, and we have hardly ever heard of the Finnish doing anything to help out the Ukrainians in this war in terms of military aid and support. There was a small amount at the beginning, but this specific equipment we're about to show was never mentioned. This is a posse armored vehicle, which also sounds like posse, which means a group of people in English. But you can see here an armored personnel carrier, and a lot of them. Look how many there are. 1, 2, 3, 4. At least 4 of them in this one garage. And also, they got spacious interiors. I mean, that's a pretty big interior in there. And so real quick, I'm actually going to show y'all a posse armored vehicle. And here it is. It's called the Patria Posse. And I know I'm probably getting that wrong, but it is from Finland. And you can see one right here. I believe this one is in Swedish colors, if I'm correct. Nope, Norwegian. Apparently the Norwegians and the Swedes use very similar camouflage patterns, which is cool to know. But moving on from that, how many of these have been produced? Good God! Look at the operational range on this thing, Matthew. 900 kilometers.
Dang.
Golly, this thing, you can take this thing on a road trip across the United States and it wouldn't run out of gas. Gosh, what a vehicle. I mean, I'm just impressed with it for its range. But let's move down here real quick and let's take a look. So, Finland. Let's see. Unknown number of vehicles donated during the Russo-Ukrainian War. And we can see more of them here. This one is used by the Finnish police school. And I gotta say, they are pretty neat looking. We can also see an Estonian one right here in Afghanistan that's been kitted out pretty impressively. I like the little turret that they've added on with the 50 caliber machine gun in it. But let's see, where in the world is the one about the Finns? Let's see, they have 425 XA 180s and 185s, and another 148 of the XA 200s. So they have in total around 600 of them. Let me think. Yeah, that would be correct. Around 600 of them, which is impressive to see that they did donate some of them. Now, they aren't just, once again, I have to say this, these aren't anything like a main battle tank. Of course, they're not going to be obliterating Russians, but these things look like they have quite a range and may be kind of speedy, actually, for a vehicle of this kind. And so it will be helping out the Ukrainians to transport troops across the battlefield better than they were able to before. And also, I just think they look cool. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from that little bit, our last bit of Location Unknown news, and we're now going to be moving on into the northern Kharkiv area, starting off at the Kharkiv border, where we can see that according to Russian propagandists, Russia is destroying Ukraine and the northern Kharkiv area. Which is kind of odd to hear because, as far as I remember, I think they were pushed out. But let's watch this video and see. We can already see that they've dropped... Oh, look at that, Matthew. Oh, wow. They're brave. This is a Ukrainian T-64BM, most likely, or T-64BV. And the Russians have dropped a ghetto bomb onto it. The bomblet is now under the tank. Oh my god. An F1 grenade's really going to do some damage there. Especially since it didn't even hit the tank. It was literally sitting on the ground beside it. A pretty lame video at that. It doesn't show anything. The tank was still moving even after the bomblet exploded. It looks like it was having no problems at all. We now see them drop another ghetto bomblet down onto a trench. And notice this. The Russians say, of course, as you'll see here, alleged footage of... Wait a minute. Oh... Look at that. When I got this clip, it had a different caption on it. The caption actually said something like Russian units destroying the Ukrainians. But now they've changed the caption, apparently because maybe a moderator on the subreddit told them, hey, change it. But we can see them dropping a ghetto bomb onto this perfectly empty trench. There's not a Ukrainian soul in this video. We now see the ghetto bomb explode, and it did nothing.
Wow.
Are they holding this thing on a string? They
That's
are.
Yeah, they are.
They are
There's
holding it on
right
a
there.
string.
I wonder how that's possible.
I wonder. And also, one thing I'd like to note here is that this bomblet looks like it didn't get anyone. This guy right here, he looks like he hit the ground trying to duck from the explosion that occurred behind him, which is a natural response. You'll see that in normal Ukrainian combat footage when an artillery explosion occurs nearby, they almost hit the ground like they were hit, but then they get up and they go running off and they're fine. And it was so far away, and look at this. That had to have been around 15 feet away from that guy, at least. And I believe if we pull up F1 grenade blast radius, 6 meters, around 20 feet. So this guy would have been around far enough away that he would have been out of the lethal blast radius and probably wouldn't have gotten any shrapnel at all, because once you're beyond, from what we can tell, the lethal blast radius, the probability of shrapnel hitting you gets pretty low, and especially shrapnel hitting you in the right place to actually cause any harm, considering that the Ukrainians do have plates that cover their back and their front on their torso. So with that,
Enforcer, I gotta say real quick, I'm convinced at this point that the Russians are buying their equipment from Acme. They have to be.
They gotta
a bomblet on a string.
A bomblet on a string. That sounds like something you get at a carnival, like a alligator on a stick or something. Look at this. This is just stupid.
It's like the carrot on the stick.
Oh my god, that's just dumb. It gets worse as the war goes on. They first used cups. We thought the cups were bad. Now they're literally putting grenades on strings. What's next? I mean, really, what is next? What in the world can they do next that would just be even stupider? Please let me know in the live chat, because I'd be interested to know. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on to our second video in the northern Kharkiv area, where we can see that the Ukrainians have gotten another rare find. This, not getting into the technical jargon up here, is a radio intercepting vehicle that the Russians have been using in this war and has now been captured by the Ukrainians. And so it looks like the Russians are now short of another translating well, not really translating, a radio transmitting interceptor vehicle, and it's good to know that the Russians will have a little bit of a tougher time trying to intercept messages. And also, look at the derelict state of this thing. It already looks like it was in bad shape, so you can assume that if the Russians do have a replacement for this radio intercepting vehicle, it's going to be far worse off than this one was. And so with that, it's great to see the Ukrainians are still capturing rarer equipment in the northern Kharkiv area, and we're now going to be moving out of northern Kharkiv and down towards Kupiansk, where we've gotten two other bits of news. We can see that the Russians and their organized retreat, as a gesture of goodwill, have left behind some treats for the Ukrainians. Once again, sign of goodwill. Let's take a look at them. According to the caption here, the Ukrainians discovered an abandoned Russian position with a fully functioning tor. It's literally an intact tor, minus the track. It's missing the track, but the rest of it's intact. Also, what the hell? Like, how in the world did they even get this here? There's not even a track. Wait a minute.
This can't be Russian. Go to that next picture. That's too neat.
That is neat.
That's so clean. That's not the way of the Russians.
It's not the way of the Russians, but I'm not exactly sure. It is a smaller amount of ammunition. It looks like it could only provide enough ammo to maybe one SPG or less, or a mortar. So it may be, and also that's just kind of normal to stack ammo that way. However, we have seen the Russians just stack this stuff in unholy ways that you can't even imagine unless you saw it. So kind of odd. But moving on to the next one, we can also see that they got, is this an Orlan?
I think it is.
They got the Orlan in the box. That's pretty nice. And also, let's see what else is in here. It looks like some kind of a little pack. Looks like a little patch. It's got an Mi-28 on it. All in all, a nice little find by the Ukrainians. And going back to the very first picture, we can also see that they left behind something that looks like a field kitchen. And pretty much, like, look at how fast the Russians left. They left pots out on the tables. It looks like they left some dishes out on the ground. They just left stuff all around. Even water bottles that still have a little bit of water in them. That tells you how...
For sure, this is what we're used to. This is Russian right here. But they must have an OCD, like, ammunition guy or something, because that was out of place compared to the rest.
Yeah, like some kind of an OCD quartermaster or something. He was like, the shells, they're just not right. And he just kept on rearranging them and sorting them until he got them into a perfect little stack. But yeah, the rest of this is prototypical Russian, especially this tor, with it missing its whole entire track on its right side. I don't even know how they got it here. The track isn't on the ground. You don't see it on the ground under the wheels. It's just missing the track. How in the world did they even drive this here? It's like, I have a lot of questions about how this tor even got here, but it's in very bad condition, much like normal Russian vehicles are. And of course, I'd like y'all to remember, the Russians say that this was an orderly retreat. And if it was an orderly retreat, how come they left behind a $15 million anti-air system? And also, this neatly stacked pile of ammunition, and also an Orlan 10, which uses a Nikon camera. So with that, that's the end of this video. Well, not video, the end of these pictures, and once again showing that the orderly retreat that the Russians wanted to call it wasn't so orderly. Otherwise, that wouldn't have been left behind. Moving on down to Kupiansk, we can see that the Ukrainians captured even more vehicles, including a UR-77 mine clearer, and also a ZU-23 autocannon and some APCs. So without further ado, here's the video.
Скажіть, що це за техніка тут?
Мотолега, це те, що ми в'їжджали в Москалят.
See Ukrainian giving an intro to the video. We can see an MTLB right there. Also another one.
Таня?
All of them are in pretty bad looking shape. This one came with a autocannon. And with that, that's the end of the video. And it's great to see that the Ukrainians were able to get all of that wonderful kit. Also, I misidentified one of the MTLBs. It's actually the UR-77 mine clearer. Just to show you all that real quick. UR-77. Right here. It's called the Meteorit. And you can see that it's an MTLB pretty much that has a little turret on top of it. That turret fires a charge attached to a line down range, and supposedly that thing will then explode, clearing a path for the tanks and the infantry to move through a minefield. However, we've seen these things used in this war to target civilian infrastructure and blow up apartment blocks. So with that, that's the end of that video. And once again, great to see that the Ukrainians are capturing a decent amount of Russian equipment and are most likely replenishing a sizable amount of their losses made during this counterattack with captured Russian gear. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on into our final segment of news for the night, which will include the unfortunate news from Izyum, the massive news from the Zaporizhzhia power plant, and everything else in between before we get to President Zelensky's speech. But before we get to all of that, we're going to take another pause to address our polls and also 3 questions from the chat. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, folks, and this is our second to last question segment of the stream, and we only have one poll to go over this time. The question was, what do you think Putin is doing right now? It looks like 43% said making plans to assassinate enemies, 23% said preparing for a political ousting, and 17% said planning to strike Ukraine with WMD, and 17% said none of the above. Now, I would have to fall between making plans to assassinate enemies and preparing for a potential political ousting. Those two kind of go hand in hand, and I'm sure that, like many dictators, he is thinking of who's going to try to take him out next and trying to plan ahead. But Enforcer, what are your thoughts?
I think that, I honestly think I would have to agree with the majority there that he's probably planning on assassinating enemies or imprisoning them or having them, well, poisoning them is assassinating them. He's most likely doing something like that. People in his position as pretty much a dictator are always thinking about how to purge their lower echelons of the government to make sure that they can keep everyone a yes man instead of becoming the guy that everyone yes mans to be executed. So with that, I hope that addresses the poll fairly well. And also, I saw someone say, it was actually Jack Flathers, said, and so with that counter times 34. And if you do not know, and so with that, and with that being said, are used as phrases for me to let Matthew know we are moving on into the next question. It is a verbal cue, so that way he has time to prepare. So that's why I do it. I don't think a lot of
very
people,
helpful too, I gotta admit.
It's incredibly helpful to Matthew. That's why I do it. And so I'm sorry if it bothers you, but that is done so that way we can keep the stream moving. Because if I stop, usually he doesn't know what to do. Like that.
What happened?
Like right there, we should be moving into the first question. But I didn't say anything.
Oh, we should?
Well, yeah, but I didn't say anything like, and so with that, we're moving on to the next question. I just stop. And y'all can see where a lot of confusion would start there because Matthew doesn't have a clue, and rightfully so, because there's no cue to move us on into the next segment. So I hope that explains that real quick, and Matthew is as confused as he would be if I didn't do stuff like that. That's why I do it. And so with that, we're now moving on into our first question of the night. And so what do we got, Matthew?
And folks, if you're wondering, because it seems simple when you're listening, But on my end, y'all don't see it because it's something that I just do on my end automatically. But I'm doing at least 3 or 4 different tasks at once. So sometimes when the enforcer says something on the stream, he catches me off guard and I give kind of like a generic response like, oh, wow, look at that. And I'll be like sort of like focused on 3 different tasks at the same time. But anyways, I was a little confused for a second, but moving on to our first super chat of this segment, we have a $40 donation from ST, who says, Slava Ukraine from Australia.
And also, Slava Ukraini from the United States. And thank you so much for supporting this channel and also supporting Ukraine as well. There's been an incredibly a large amount of kind people in here who have helped this channel to keep on running. You are one of them. And so I got to thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we are now on to the next one, and thank you so much once again. And also, real quick, since people want to keep bringing it up, because I've seen this always brought up, I'm going to baby y'all through why I say these exact same things at the end of questions and at the end of things when Matthew should commentate on them, or at least when I'm hoping he can. Is Matthew has no clue. Like if I say, so like if you ask about the nuclear power plant, I say, and that's a big issue, and then I just stop like that. There's no cue to move on. Matthew doesn't know if I'm taking a pause to think or moving on, and that's why I always say something at the end of a question like, and so with that, because that's the I guess you could say that's the preparatory phase that we're moving on, and then I sit there and go through a little bit of a spiel, like, thank you so much for the support, it helps us out massively, I hope I answered the question fairly well, that's given Matthew enough time to move on to the next question, and then I usually say, and so with that again, so that way we have, I guess you could say, the second command, which is the command of execution, to then move on into the next question. And so with that, I hope I've addressed that fairly well. We're now moving on into the second question of the question segment.
That's it, Enforcer. I'm done. I'm heading over to Operator Starsky stream.
And also, real quick, everyone, I'm not talking down to Matthew because I've seen some people make it sound like I am. If I was on
they're misunderstanding.
If I was on his end, what I'm saying is that if you don't have cues, no matter how intelligent you can be, if you don't have a cue, you don't know when we're moving on. So that's why there has to be a cue. Otherwise, this whole entire show would fall apart, and it would be massive confusion in between Matthew and me as to when the next question comes up or anything like that. So we're now moving on to the next one. I hope I cleared that up fairly well.
All right, and moving on to our next super chat, we have a $30 donation from a man's name is on one, who says, Hey Enforcer, congratulations on 100,000 subs. We know the United States left a lot of equipment in Afghanistan. Do you think it's a good idea if Ukrainians go and pick up the equipment left behind by the United States?
Well, I thank you for the massive support, but to answer that question, it wouldn't really be possible for the Ukrainians to go and grab that equipment because it's currently being used by someone else. So
they might get in a little small brawl, to say the least.
To put it lightly. And also, it'll be pretty difficult for Ukraine to get to Afghanistan because it's surrounded by the neutral countries of Pakistan. It's surrounded by the somewhat more hostile country of Iran. It's surrounded by the Russian-friendly states, the Stand series, and also the only bit of the border that it shares with China is also kind of unavailable. Also, real quick to show y'all something there. That area of the border is practically inaccessible. If you'll notice, there are no roads. There are literally no roads there, and it's just nothing but mountain ranges. And let me look. Yep, there's not even a picture from that area. That tells you how uninhabited it is. So there's not even a way to get it through China because there's not even a road there to do that with. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well. And so thank you so much once again for the support. And we are now on to the final question of this segment, and then we'll be moving on into the next and last segment of news.
And the final one of this segment goes to Mech Tactical, who puts in a $20 donation and says, hilarious. Not 20 minutes ago, Russian troll, Starsky, what do you operate? And Starsky said, oh, look, a Russian bot. I have to inform you, sir. I operate planet, uh-oh. Let's see here. Mech, I'm going to have to pass on saying that. But he says, Starsky was awesome and also shouted you out again.
And also, Starsky's been shouting us out a massive deal, and I, of course, have to shout him out again. We're now in a shouting out battle as to how many times we can shout each other out on each other's videos and streams. But Operator Starsky is an incredibly cool guy. Not only for helping us out with fundraisers, but he's just a cool guy to talk to. We talk to him after stream. Usually when Matthew and me are almost dead, but that's when Operator Starsky is his most spry because he's finally getting up for the morning. You know, like his brain's finally clicking into action. And so we talk a lot after stream. It's always enjoyable. He always has some fun things to say, some interesting stuff too. And it's been an absolute pleasure to know him, to become friends with him, and of course for us to work together to help out Ukraine as much as we can. We've been running fundraisers like crazy. He's helped us out with a good amount of them. They always do well whenever he's on. I believe that's because a lot of people want to let Operator Starsky know how much they support Ukraine, which is a great thing. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. We're not done with this one yet. I'm just telling you that there real quick. I thank you so much for the support. And also, if you have not heard about Operator Starsky, please go over to his channel and subscribe. He is an officer in the Ukrainian military, and he does some really good comedy skits now. He does these little short videos on this channel that are pretty funny. And he also still covers war news and does live streams as well, like us. Although I think they're like once a week. They're not daily, but he still does cover the war a lot and keeps people up to date with what's going on there. Also, one other thing is that someone asked me in my comment section, I don't know if this is an attempt to start throwing a kind of like a wrench into Operator Starsky's validity, but in his defense real quick, someone said, what did Operator Starsky do before the war? I think he was just a singer. And like, I was like, well, don't insult him like that, you know, because he's been in the Ukrainian military since 2014. He started off in the enlisted ranks, worked his way up to sergeant, and eventually he's now become a first lieutenant in the Ukrainian military as of right now. So,
and even if he was hypothetically a singer before the war, he's now in there doing good work for Ukraine. So come on.
Yeah, and also another thing is that, and I have to say this again, and I think this is a great way to say this. You do not have to be in the military or experienced 10 to 20 years to be able to say what's going on or to be able to conduct a war in a good way. Let me give you an example. Abraham Lincoln had no military experience whatsoever going into the presidency prior to the Civil War. He led the United States through the Civil War and ended up being the victorious country, defeating the Confederate States pretty much outright, although it was still a bloody slaughter. And also, as a more modern example, and one that everyone's familiar with, President Zelenskyy was a comedian and had absolutely no political or military experience before he became president of Ukraine, and look at him now. He's the leader of a nation that is lambasting a country that, at least according to the experts before the war, that did have 10 to 20 years of military experience, shouldn't have even been possible. Yet here we are, 205 days in, sitting here and praising a man who had no military experience whatsoever, who was leading a nation to victory. That right there in its own tells you that you don't have to have any military experience at all to be able to, and of course, let me say this real quick. You do need military experience. And we're back! Yes! We're back. Let's see, mic broke. Oh, man. Let's see, okay, I don't know where we got cut off. Anyways, going back just a little second and backtracking just to make sure that this was heard, you don't have to have military experience to be able to conduct a war well, or to at least know what you're talking about. A lot, you know, for my defense, and honestly, over time, I have gotten to where I'm pretty confident in my assumptions and assertions in this war because most of them have turned out to be correct. But at the same time, I can be wrong at any given moment. I could end up just being wrong on something and say something that'll end up being wrong in the future. Still, over the course of this war, I, a college student of 20 years of age, with just a decent amount of historical knowledge of how things have worked out in the past under similar situations, I've been able to predict a large amount of what would happen in this war. That tells you how easy it can be, and also considering that a lot of I guess you could say leaders of nations really didn't have a lot of military experience going into wars, yet would still end up the victorious nation and leading their country to victory. It does show you that you don't really have to be a massive expert with 30 years experience to be able to know what you're talking about. So with that, I hope that answers addresses that fairly well, and also I hope that gives a lot of confidence out there to people who think, oh man, you know, like I have to I have to, like, go become a Shaolin monk for 30 years to understand the stuff. You don't have to. You just have to read history. Now, one thing I will say, though, is that this is one thing I cannot stand, is people who watch something like Lord of the Rings and then think that they can extrapolate something from that and then interpret it into real life. And they'll sit there and go, we just need to go straight to Moscow and kill Putin and the whole Russian war machine will fall apart. That kind of stuff is like movie talk. It doesn't work. You have to go to history. History only is the key to what will happen. That's my belief. I guess that's my school of thinking. But, then again, like everything, I could be wrong. Anyways, with that, we're now going to be moving on. I think that was the last question of this segment, wasn't it, Matthew?
Indeed.
And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that addressed the question fairly well. And with that, we're now going to be moving on into the remainder of our news for the night. And so starting off, we of course have to start off on a little bit of a lower note with what has occurred in Izyum. As Ukrainian forces have liberated Izyum days ago, they've now been wandering around the town and seeing the condition that it was left in once they had liberated it. During this time, they have now found a mass grave of 400 people, and just before the stream, the number was now upped as they found a second mass grave, bringing this number up to 1,000 total people who have been killed by Russian atrocities in the city. This is larger than the number of dead that were found in the Buch Hostomel IRpin area. Here's a picture of one of the graves that was found in the middle of the woods. And you can see that the crosses go on and on and on in just about every single direction. And you can also see that there was no attempt made to name these people. They just put numbers on their burial plots: 347, 412, 411, and it just goes on. I mean, and you can even see that this is cross number 347. That's number 411. That's number 412. So if you go further to the right, you'll get to 413. If you go further to the left, you're going to get to 410. And this is 347. And so somewhere down the line, there are about a couple of other dozen crosses that you can't see off screen to the right that then loop back into the next row where 412 and 411 is, and then start over again and continue to move on down. And that tells you how many people are in this mass grave. And that also tells you how many war crimes have been committed by the Russians and how sick their military really is. I don't think at this point there is a single redeemable soul in the entire Russian military. I have not seen a single place that the Russian military has been where a war crime on a massive scale has not been committed. And Izyum is another example of it, and an even larger example than everything else before. The Ukrainians are, of course, already starting to exhume these graves and give these Ukrainians a proper burial and try and identify their bodies if they are still identifiable. And hopefully the Ukrainian military can find these sick freaks who conducted this, once again, heinous act of crime against humanity. It's not even a war crime. This is just straight up debauchery. It's the worst thing imaginable. And I hope that they're able to find these people and have them held accountable to the strictest degree. And even at this point, I think it would nearly be excusable if these people didn't even make it to Ukrainian court and they ended up somewhere fertilizing a field. So with that, we're now going to be moving on from this picture, and we're also going to be moving on to the Reuters post that was made today, which has been removed. Actually, it's a Sky News video, which we will not show, but it does also, I guess you could say, expound a little bit more on the information of the mass graves that were found at Izyum. If you would like to watch that video, the link is in the description below, and you can watch that video for yourself. Unfortunately, I cannot show it because I may be infringing on Sky News copyright, but it is there just in case if you want to watch it. And I just want y'all to think about that for a second again. This is one of the multiple times that we've heard of Russian war crimes being committed on hundreds, over 1,000 Ukrainian civilians in this one instance. And it's not stopping. Every time a Ukrainian town is retaken, when Severodonetsk and Lysychansk is retaken, we're going to see graves of hundreds, if not thousands of people there. We're going to see graves of tens of thousands of people at Mariupol, hundreds in Berdyansk, hundreds in Melitopol, hundreds in Kherson, and dozens in every single small village and town that the Ukrainians will liberate. The Russians are not liberating this land. They're doing nothing more than subjugating them to a life of suffering and death that the Russians will perpetrate on their own and ensure that the Ukrainians are treated like some kind of a lesser people. And in the meantime, tell the rest of the world that they're trying to free these people and liberate them from the oppressive Ukrainian Nazis. And so with that, we're now going to be moving out of Izyum, and that unfortunate news. And we're now going to be moving down to the area of the cave monastery where we saw some of these sick Russians being hit by a Ukrainian mortar strike. We see the Russians here setting up a 120mm mortar. And the Ukrainians, of course, being as proactive as possible, are going to destroy this mortar unit the first chance they get. We see the Russians still working on the mortar position to the left. And the artillery is now coming down on the position. We see the artillery continuing to come down, and they are thoroughly taking out this mortar. Now, a decent amount of smoke is billowing up from the position of that mortar pit, letting us know that there is ammunition cooking off and burning down there. And we can see the Ukrainians are still going to ensure that these Russians will never, I guess you could say, in their nap. We can see the ammunition continue to burn as the artillery still comes down. And with that, that's the end of the video, and it's good to see that the Ukrainians wiped out another Russian mortar unit. We're now going to be moving out of the area of the cave monastery and further down into an area in the Donetsk region, but we don't know exactly where. Here we saw Ukrainian special forces clearing houses in a town in Donetsk. When you see some Russians running into what appears to be a pretty high-end house with a very nice yard. And we can now hear copyrighted music, which is scary, so we're going to mute that. And we now see the Ukrainians storming this house where the Russians are and clearing it of these people. Also, that was a very nice house. We see them hitting it with grenades. They're firing their M4s into the building. And it's very interesting to see that Ukrainians, at least special forces, are shifting away from AKs and they're starting to use M4s. We see them throwing grenades down into the basement. We see them throwing more grenades down into that basement. They are really trying to get rid of those Russians down there. We now see the special forces moving through the house again. Once again, firing down towards that basement. And we can see that they've thoroughly wrecked that house. It looks like it's in far worse shape now than it ever was. We can also see a Russian trying to walk down the staircase on the other side and get away. With that, that's the end of the video, and it's good to see that the Ukrainians are still making sure to make the Russians pay for the ground that they've tried to take, and making sure to take it back one way or another. Moving on further down towards the area of Bilohorivka, we saw that the Ukrainians were able to conduct a javelin long shot today. An incredibly long shot. And so, here's the video. And you see the javelin launched, and goes high up.
And there goes a piece of Troy, Alabama.
Go get him, Troy! We now see out there in that tree line, pretty good decent distance away. Let's wait for it. Let's wait for it. Boom, right there. Hit the tank. The tank's now on fire and brewing up. thick black smoke is coming off of it, meaning that that tank was destroyed. And also we can see a Ukrainian T-72 on standby there, just in case if the Javelin couldn't do the job. But with that, that's the end of the video, and it's great to see that the Ukrainians are still knocking out Russian vehicles across the front lines. We're now going to be moving out of the area of Bilohorivka and further down into Luhansk. Well, actually, real quick, I forgot about this little clip just behind Luhansk to the east, where we saw that the Luhansk government is undergoing some mobilization efforts. I'm going to let y'all see this and let y'all see what it's like to be in the wonderful Luhansk People's Republic.
Oh.
Well, that looks like a great conscription process. I'm sure he's getting a great sign-on bonus. What do you think, Matthew?
Yeah. No.
I don't think so. And it's also great to know that you always physically abuse your soldiers really good before they get to the front lines, because I'm sure that really makes them want to fight for their homeland. This isn't even their homeland. This is just some goons that are representing the Russian government in the eastern part of Ukraine. So with that, that's the end of that video. And we're now going to be moving on to the next one out of the LPR. Once again, remember that's the conscription process. We're now moving into Donetsk, and we can see that outside of Pisky, a Ukrainian drone, actually a Russian drone. Wait, hang on, let me get this correct here. Ukrainian unit, this is the drone, this is a Ukrainian drone, is watching Ukrainian aircraft and artillery strike Russian positions. I just wanted to make sure I got that clear, so that way later on in the video I wasn't like, wait a minute, that's a Ukrainian Su-25. When you see Ukrainian Su-25 right there, streaking over the skies, popping off its flares. And we now see the Ukrainians raining down artillery fire onto some positions near the Pisky area. See some vehicles burning on the streets, Russians walking through waste and then becoming waste. Artillery raining down, loads of Russian vehicles rounding corners that just then get promptly destroyed. And with that, that's the end of the video, and it's great to see that the Ukrainians are still inflicting a decent amount of casualties on Russian forces in the Pisky area. Moving on into the direction of Krasnohorivka, we saw that the Russians claimed that they were storming this place, or at least the DPR was. However, the problem is that they aren't. They're not even in the area. We now see them here showing off a tree line and now firing their artillery. And also, if you heard the music here, I'm not even going to risk playing a little bit of it, but if you go click on the link in the description below and go click on this video, the music here is so stupid. It's like some kind of like video game epic music or something like that they're playing on top of this. And it just makes it so much cheaper. We can now see them showing, oh look, the trench line, comrade. We see the artillery missing the trench, now hitting in one part of the trench that is, of course, partitioned off, because the Ukrainians are smart enough to not dig them in perfectly straight lines. We can see some smoke coming up from the areas where the artillery hit, but we can't see any destroyed vehicles. We can now see that they've highlighted a single Ukrainian soldier that is apparently holding this trench. Well, now there's two Ukrainian soldiers holding this trench against an entire Russian squad. Now we see a third Ukrainian come into view. And all three of these guys are defending their trench from 6 Russians. We can also see a destroyed Russian BMP right in front of the trench, looking like they've done this before. We now see the Ukrainians moving around in their trench as they are defending it. We now see some soldiers running into the trench, but we can't tell who is who. And with that, that's the end of the video. And once again, we're not entirely sure if these pictures, all they're blurred out, are accurate or not. And also, if they are, we already know that for every one Ukrainian that ends up, unfortunately, dying for their country, there's about 5 to 7 Russians that end up dying for theirs. So, even then, things aren't going well for the Russians. With that, we're now going to be moving on with the Donetsk area and further down to the southern front, where we've seen that the Arvzivka is using their drones to guide improv grad batteries. Now, I actually found out, Matthew, what is up with the improv grad batteries and why the Ukrainians are using them. They're made up of parts of former captured Russian grads, and so that's why these things have started to appear on the front lines as of the past 2 months.
Well, that's nice. Another example of Ukrainian ingenuity.
And also another example of a Russian Lend-Lease helping out the Ukrainians to fight the Russians. Also, we're going to have to mute it because it has music. When you see the Ukrainian here calling in the rocket fire and the improv grad firing off the
I like the thumbs up at the end.
We can now see those grad rockets coming down onto the Russians. We now see them bringing a reloading truck, apparently. Got a little bit of a nose exhale from Matthew there, I heard that. And now we can see once again a repeat of the video of the Russians at the garage, and now we can see the MLRS that fired onto that area.
Was that a Unimog?
It looked like a Unimog, didn't it?
Oh, that's cool.
Let me pull that up. Unimog. Yep, it's a Unimog.
Yeah, it was. That's so cool.
That's actually really neat. Let's take a look at this one. I like those. I have to say, that's a pretty cool looking vehicle. But with that, we're now going to go back to this, where we see them using the Unimog to fire onto the garage. We now see them backing out one of the Unimogs, and that's the end of the video, and it's great to see that the Ukrainians are using their ingenuity and intelligence to defeat the Russians where they lack the most, which is in intelligence and ingenuity. With that, we're now moving on into the area of Vasilivka, where we can see that the Ukrainians fired an MT-12 cannon at the Russians. We can see the MT-12 right there. And... jeez! And that's the end of the video, and it's great to see the Ukrainians are still using heavy artillery against the Russians. And so with that, we're now moving to Enerhodar, where we have gotten some pretty good news, actually. It's very good news. The IAEA, which went and inspected the power plant some time ago, has now come back with an official report, and of course this link is sending you to the IAEA website where you can read it, demanding that the Russians leave the area and that a demilitarized zone be created around the power plant and that the Russians stop using it as a warehouse for Russian military equipment supplies, and they also stop their attacks against the power plant. Both incredibly good things, and it's good to hear that the IAEA didn't get a weak spine and, of course, stood up for what was right and said that the Russians ought to leave the place and it ought to be turned into a demilitarized zone. And so with that, we're now going to be moving on from that massive milestone of news and down into the Kherson area to cover our last 3 bits of news before we get to the speech from President Zelenskyy. Starting off, we can see south of Davidivbrid, a couple of Russian tanks burning. Here you see one in the field. Looking kind of toasty. Looks like a BTR, actually. It looks like it also had a small turret toss, as we can see the turret to the bottom of the screen. We now see them taking another good look at this burning BTR. And it looks like another vehicle went for a turret toss. Good on it. We can actually see that this turret toss was so forceful that it actually ripped up the upper part of the hull, and you can see the tank's turret ring just sitting vertically, which is insane. And it also tells you the force of how heavily that ammunition explodes. And so with that, That's the end of that video, and we're now going to be moving on into our second to last one, where we can see a Su-24 at low altitude, and of course, a Ukrainian Su-24 at low altitude somewhere in the area. We can see a Ukrainian artillery piece, and here comes the Su-24, roaring over the landscape. A sign that the Ukrainian Air Force is still there. And with that, that's the end of that video. We're moving on to our final one, where we can see some HIMARS launches in the area. I'd also like y'all to note that we don't have any video evidence of actual frontline activities from the Kherson area today, suggesting that that entire counterattack may have been a ruse, just so that way the northeastern one could have an extra little boost going into it. So with that, that's the end of that video, and it's nice to see the Ukrainians are still firing HIMARS at targets deep into Russian-occupied territory. Of course, we haven't seen any frontline changes anywhere from Donetsk to Kherson, and so, as far as we can tell, the front line has remained stable, although we are hoping for changes in the coming weeks. With that, we're now going to move to Kyiv to cover the speech from President Zelenskyy, and after that, that will conclude our news segment for the night. And so, without further ado, here's the speech that President Zelenskyy made today, and he did address the Izyum mass grave as well. And so, here's the video.
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці. Сьогодні у Києві на Алеї Сміливих була відкрита нова табличка, присвячена президентці Єврокомісії Урсулі фон дер Ляєн. Для мене було і дійсно великою честю і просто по-людськи приємно взяти участь у цьому відкритті, у такому відзначенні сміливості пані Урсули. Вона одна з центральних фігур європейської політики щодо України. Вона одна з тих, завдяки кому європейський простір, європейські цінності зараз дійсно вдається захищати. Пані Урсула сьогодні побувала вже втретє у нашій державі після 24 лютого. І щоразу її візити відкривають новий етап у зближенні України та Євросоюзу. Ми обговорили усі ключові пункти у наших відносинах. Але зараз хочу особливо відзначити інтеграційне питання, рух нашої держави до повноправного членства в ЄС. Якими б не були обставини, ми все одно реалізуємо кожну деталь наших домовленостей, щоб відкрити можливість переговорів щодо членства. Вже в листопаді маємо виконати 7 рекомендацій Єврокомісії, які ми отримали при здобутті статусу кандидата. Має розпочатися якнайшвидша оцінка Єврокомісією нашого прогресу в інтеграції. Наступного року маємо вийти і на ясність в головному питанні, коли зможемо розпочати переговори щодо членства. З українського боку буде зроблено все для цього. І в якості елементів зближення розглядаємо такі речі, як режим внутрішнього ринку ЄС для України, як поєднання нашої інституційної роботи, наприклад, на митниці, у спільному митному контролі між Україною і країнами ЄС. Вже працюємо заради цього. Сьогодні подякував пані Урсулі за вже надану підтримку макрофінансову, санкційну, оборонну. Ми обговорили і співпрацю в енергетиці, що надзвичайно важливо і для України, і для кожної країни ЄС перед цією зимою, яку Росія спробує використати проти усіх нас в Європі. Я поінформував про нову і особливо підлу тактику російських терористів, удари по енергетичній та гідротехнічній інфраструктурі. Якраз у час перебування президентки Єврокомісії в Україні російська армія нанесла новий ракетний удар по Кривому Рогу, по Кіровоградщині, в обох випадках по гідротехнічним спорудам. Мета цих ударів абсолютно зрозуміла, це удари саме по людям, по нормальності життя в Україні. Держава-терорист намагається показати, ніби вона може компенсувати такими ударами боягузтво і бездарність її військових, провал її намагань уникнути санкцій та економічної ізоляції. Ми ж у відповідь маємо показати, що на кожен прояв російського терору буде незмінна жорстка і принципова реакція. Тому і потрібен 8-й санкційний пакет ЄС. Ми про це говорили з пані Урсулою. Потрібне і принципове рішення Сполучених Штатів Америки по відношенню до держави-терориста, юридичне визнання цього статусу. І ми це, до речі, обговорювали нещодавно під час візиту у Київ держсекретаря США Ентоні Блінкена. Обговорюємо це питання і під час контактів з конгресменами. Потрібен прогрес в наданні Україні систем протиповітряної оборони. Ми вже маємо домовленості з певними країнами, наші дипломати працюють з іншими. Хочу підкреслити, що без надання нам достатньої кількості достатньо ефективних систем ППО, які захистять українське небо, Росія і надалі відчуватиме безкарність і буде провокувати нові локальні і глобальні кризи. Тож захист України від російських ракет – це дійсно базовий елемент глобальної безпеки. Загалом, підтримка України зброєю, снарядами, фінансами має вирішальне значення для миру в Європі. Чим якіснішу підтримку ми маємо, тим швидше закінчиться ця війна. Говорив про це з представниками провідних аналітичних центрів Польщі, Британії, Франції, Сполучених Штатів Америки, які прибули в Київ. Реальний захист свободи, наших спільних цінностей, вільного світу можливий зараз лише як наслідок перемоги України в цій війні. Говорив про подальшу підтримку України із прем'єр-міністром Канади Джастіном Трюдо. Як завжди, дуже предметно, конкретно ми обговорили різні безпекові питання, зокрема російські ракетні удари, оборонну допомогу, тренування наших військових, перспективи розвитку ситуації на полі бою, відновлення критичної інфраструктури перед зимовим періодом. Я вдячний пану прем'єр-міністру за вже надану нам підтримку, зокрема фінансову, за кошти на закупівлю газу і за розуміння тих кроків, які ми маємо зробити, щоб зламати терористичні плани Росії. Сьогодні була прийнята важлива резолюція МАГАТЕ. Резолюція з вимогою до Росії припинити всі дії проти Запорізької атомної станції і на самій станції, на будь-якому іншому атомному об'єкту в Україні. Хоча міжнародні організації часто обмежені у своїх можливостях реагувати, але ми бачимо, що МАГАТЕ чітко визначає джерело радіаційної небезпеки, а саме російську військову присутність на Запорізькій станції, російські дії проти атомної станції. Тому повна демілітаризація станції, негайне виведення звідти усіх російських військових – це єдине, що може забезпечити виконання цієї резолюції МАГАТЕ, і це теж базовий елемент глобальної безпеки. Поки на ЗАЕС залишаються російські солдати, світ залишається на межі радіаційної катастрофи, гіршою, ніж навіть Чорнобильська. І це спільна відповідальність усіх в Європі та усіх в світі – прибрати російську присутність з території ЗАЕС. Хочу сьогодні подякувати усім представникам Державної служби з надзвичайних ситуацій, комунальним службам, нашим будівельникам, працівникам поліції, військовим, представникам місцевої влади, представникам бізнесу, кожному і кожній, хто задіяний в ліквідації наслідків російського ракетного удару, хто допомагає тим, хто постраждав від ударів у Кривому, на Кіровоградщині, у Харкові, в Запоріжжі, у Миколаєві, на Донеччині, в усіх містах і громадах, з яких Росія знущається за допомогою своїх ракет. Держава-терорист застосувала проти нас вже більше 3800 різних ракет. Але жодна ракета не наблизить Росію до її цілі. Підкорення України не буде. І кожна ракета наближає Росію до більшої міжнародної ізоляції, до більшої економічної деградації і до ще чіткішого історичного засудження. І наостанок, в Ізюмі, на Харківщині, знайдене масове захоронення людей. Необхідні процесуальні дії там вже розпочались. Більше інформації чіткої, перевіреної інформації має бути завтра. Завтра ж в Ізюмі будуть журналісти, українські, міжнародні, всі. Ми хочемо, щоб світ знав, що реально відбувається і до чого призвела російська окупація. Буча, Маріуполь, тепер, на жаль, Ізюм. Росія всюди залишає по собі смерть і повинна за це відповідати. Світ повинен притягнути Росію до реальної відповідальності за цю війну. Зробимо все для цього. Вічна пам'ять усім, чиє життя забрали окупанти. Вічна слава кожному, хто воює за Україну. Слава Україні!
And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Zelenskyy, and that also rounds out our summary of the news. Now, I thank you all so much for watching. Of course, if you have enjoyed this news segment, also real quick, if y'all are wondering what that pause was, I was trying to eat during the middle of President Zelensky's speech because I'm starving to death right now. So if you did enjoy it, sorry about that. Please make sure to subscribe. We run these streams every single day of the week at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, except for Mondays. But we cover the past 24 hours of the news every single day. And so with that, thank you so much once again, everyone, for watching. And if you are here for the question segment, of course, as I always say, the fun has just begun. And so with that, we're going to allow Matthew to take over, so that way I can try and hork down the small amount of food I have left, and also he can guide us into the polls. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, folks, and while the Enforcer has a little snack over there, we're going to move into our final question segment, and we have 2 polls to address, a whopping 2 polls. The first one said, do you think Putin will ever be held accountable at a war crimes trial? It looks like 57% said no, he will probably never be. 17% said maybe, it depends on the details. And 26% said yes, he will be prosecuted one day. Now for me, I would have to say that I would probably say no, he will probably never be in a war crimes trial. Even if they were able to get him, if he was ousted from Russia, I have a feeling he would probably take the easy way out before he ever allowed himself to be humiliated at a war crimes trial. But Enforcer, if you're done with your snack, would you like to weigh in?
And that was perfect timing because I just got done. Now, to answer that one, I believe that Putin would not be ever held accountable for what he's done here. Russia, in my opinion, will most likely still stand at the end of this war. Now, whether Putin is in charge of that government or not is another question. But I feel that if a new government did take over, they wouldn't be too harsh against Putin, because it may be true that a large amount of the Russian population does like him. We're not entirely sure, but I feel honestly that that's not necessarily true. And so they may just oust him kind of like Gorbachev, and then he just hangs around in suspended animation until he eventually dies, and he's not really looked upon positively within Russia. So with that, I do believe that I'd have to fall within the majority that says that he will not be held accountable for his crimes. And also, another thing, real quick, this is kind of a bit of a side note. I saw some people asking, what in the world am I eating? If y'all have ever seen them, it's the Bumblebee Tuna Salad Pack. You know, it's got like the little crackers in it and then some tuna salad in it. I was trying to eat that real quick because one thing that's tough about these streams is that I talk nonstop for nearly 3 hours straight in them. Right now it's 2 hours and 10 minutes. And the last time I ate was at like 3 o'clock. And right now it's 11 o'clock for me. So it was a long time ago. And sometimes I go starving in the middle of the stream. And this time, since President Zelensky's speech was long enough, I was like, man, maybe I can go and grab something to eat real quick and eat it before he's done with the speech. And then I literally was eating like the last bit of it right when the speech ended. But with that, I hope that kind of answers the question fairly well as to what I was eating. Those little things are good, and I like them a lot. So with that, I hope I've been able to address the poll and also answer everyone's question as to what I was eating. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, folks, and we're moving on to our second poll, which said, who else loves the Mercedes Unimog? It looks like 53% said, yes, I like. 32% said, I don't know what that is. And 15% said, nah, it's okay. And folks, if you don't know what a Unimog is, the Enforcer did show it earlier, and he's going to pull it up again. There it is. This Unimog right here is really cool. It's really capable, too. The thing can basically drive over anything. And if you know what the Mercedes, I believe it's called G-Wagon, G500, that is actually based on the Unimog chassis. So it's pretty capable, too, but it comes with a ungodly price tag. But the Unimog is just so cool. I love it.
I gotta be honest with you, I'm not really a big fan of the G-Wagon. I don't think it looks good.
It's a little, I don't know, like, how to describe it, a little bit silly looking to me, at least.
Yeah.
And crazy expensive.
You see, because whenever I'm driving around in Birmingham, like going to college or anything like that, I'll usually see one of these things somewhere, and when you see them, they just look goofy. I mean, like, they stick out like a sore thumb. They're incredibly angular, and I mean, you know, everyone has their own taste, so everyone's not going to agree with me on this one. But I just still don't like the style of the car. If you're going to get something like an SUV at that point, with this kind of price tag, why not just get a Bentley Bentayga or something like that? And I mean, like, even at that just looks like an Audi Q7, but Bentayga, there we go. I mean,
and all these cars are overpriced. Like this Bentayga, like you said, is just basically an offshoot of a Audi, which is much cheaper than a Bentley. But yeah, just paying for the name.
So real quick, we'll actually show you all the comparison here. Actually a better one. Let me try and find a better looking. Here we go. Audi Q7, Bentley Bentayga. The similarity is striking. It's almost the same vehicle. So with that, I hope that addresses that poll fairly well. And I also have to agree with the large majority of y'all. Again, the Unibog is a super cool looking truck. I really like that thing, and also I love that the Ukrainians are using it to a very efficient way. And so with that, I hope I was able to address that poll fairly well as well. And with that, we're now going to move into our question segment. And before we do, Matthew, how many super chats do we have?
So let's see here. We have about quick mass. I would say about 35 to 40.
All right. So with that, we're now going to move into the first one.
And folks, while it's on my mind, I said it in the live chat, but I'll say it again. Toyota needs to bring the Hilux to America, and Mercedes needs to bring the Unimog to America, because they would sell like crazy. And I have no idea why they don't bring them here, because they don't understand the market they're missing out on.
I thought there were Toyota Hiluxes in America. This one's in New South Wales. What about?
Yeah, they're only in Europe and also Australia, but they have the Tacoma here. It's supposedly the version of the Hilux, but it's not quite the same.
Yeah, I wish they would bring the famous Hilux here. Also, you can see. Oh, I better not show that too much though and talk about it. But it was a picture from the BBC from Top Gear of a destroyed Hilux that they kind of ran through the ringer. Anyways, with that, on to the first question of the night.
And the first question goes to Just Chillin', who puts in a $20 donation and says, "Boom shakalaka."
And thank you so much for the support. And also, boom shakalaka, boom shakalaka. And so, thank you so much once again. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $20 super chat from Judo 2001, who says, "Haven't chipped in for a while. Sorry. I have chipped in on Sundays, though. Anyway, how many A10s, oh no, will Mr. Lunchtime need to get his nipple-flavored drink out of Ukraine before it automatically becomes part of the PP fund? Love you."
A10s? I've never heard of it. Keep that away from me. But I thank you for the support. And a pretty good joke. I don't really know, honestly, how I could answer that question even as a joke. But thank you so much. And also, we've had to start a new campaign. As a lot of y'all remember crack hitting the streets in the 80s in the United States and being a huge problem, and the government saying, just say no to drugs. We're starting a new movement on this channel of just say no to A10s. If someone tries to bring up an A10 to you or tries to encourage you to talk about it, just say no. It won't hurt. Only thing they can do is stop. And that way, we can avoid the A10 epidemic. It's been the leading cause of stress-induced casualties among the Lee Spring Army, and so we want to make sure that we keep the Lee Spring Army as healthy and safe as possible. This is your brain. This is your brain on A10s. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the support.
And up next, we have a $20 super chat from Lee Spring Army, who says, "What do you think they will find when they liberate Mariupol? My spider sense thinks that this is where the worst atrocities were committed. Post-war, we'll need to dox and hunt down the animals behind these war crimes."
What we'll find in Mariupol is the hellscape. The entire city was destroyed. The whole thing will have to be razed at the end of this war and rebuilt. And we already know that there's a mass grave outside the city with 40,000 dead Ukrainian citizens in it. And so what we'll find there, once the Ukrainians actually liberate that town, will be the worst thing that will probably ever be found over the course of this entire war. And so with that, I hope that answers the question in a somewhat shorter way, but a fairly effective way. And with that, we are on to the next one. And you are absolutely correct. That will most likely be the worst atrocity that we'll ever witness in this war. And so with that, we're on to the next one. Y'all can see right there, if I don't have a cue and I just pause right there, we don't know. Like there's no communication there to move on to the next one. So that's why there has to be an so with that segment or a so with that kind of thing, so that way I can keep this rolling without long
And
pauses.
Portia, did you do that just to make a point?
Yes, I did.
Okay, I was about to say, I was like a long silence, and I was like, is it my turn to go? But anyways, now that it is my turn to go, up next we have a $20 super chat from KG, who says, I guarantee if they start targeting civilian infrastructure more than they already are, Ukraine's going to get very long-range weapons and maybe even likely given the go-ahead to start striking into Russia itself.
That may be the case. That does require a lot of assumption work to back up, and I know that I do a decent amount of assumptions these days, but that one is really tough because that requires a lot of people to kind of be on the same page and tell Ukraine, here's some weapons that the Russians have already drawn a red line about. You can shoot them into Russia for all we care. And I don't know if every single politician in every single country that would provide those weapons would agree with that, but I personally agree with that statement, 100%. And I think that if the Russians continue to do these heinous things like they have been for the past 6 months, at some point, we ought to just lift the floodgates and say, here you go, Ukraine. Here's some Tomahawks, some Attackums. Go ham. Just start shooting them at Moscow if you want. We won't care. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
And up next, we have a $20 super chat from Kaltenberg. And Kaltenberg wants you all to know that he is sexy and he knows it. And Kaltenberg, there is no way I'm going to read that off. Absolutely not. If the enforcer wants to give it a go, though, he can have at it.
I unfortunately don't know how the song went. I remember it, but I don't know how the song goes exactly. So I don't know if I can read that off and have the lyrics right or not. But if you want Kaltenberg, I would read that off in the Sam Elliott voice.
Oh, boy.
Let's see. We'll give it a second so that way Kaltenberg can respond. And so with that, we'll move on to the next one in the meantime. But if you give us the go-ahead, Kaltenberg, I will read that off in the Sam Elliott voice the best I can.
All right. And up next, we have a $20 super chat from Enforcer for President. We also have a few $10 super chats. We have one from Heather Fitzgibbon, and then we have two more from Enforcer for President, with no comments behind any of them. But thank you very much to all of you for the support, and we appreciate you, Enforcer for President, and we also appreciate you very much, Heather Fitzgibbon, for being around for quite some time. And Enforcer, would you like to add anything to it?
And I sure would. I would like to thank both of y'all, Heather Fitzgibbon and Enforcer for President, for supporting this channel. I know that both of y'all are members of the old guard on this channel, and I thank y'all so much for helping this thing to keep on running nightly and helping to keep the lights on, food in our guts, so that way I can eat things like tuna salad packs from Bumblebee, because that stuff is delicious. And so thank you so much once again for the support to both of y'all once again. And with that, let's see if Kaltenberg has responded. Let's see. He said, hey, go for it. All right. All right, so let me think for a second. All right. Have you ever wanted Ford F-150? Okay. All right. When I walk in on the... Oh, I can't... Dang it. I'm sorry. My voice is still trying to recover, and for some reason it can't do that voice all too well, but we will try. Even if it's terrible, we will give it a try. When I walk in on the spot, yeah, this is what I see. Yeah, a Ford F-150. Everybody stops and they staring at me. I got passion in my pants and I ain't afraid to show it. Show it, show it, show it. I'm sexy and I know it. And you gotta get that.
Oh boy.
And you gotta get that brand new Ford F-150 to be as sexy as you can be. That thing will sit there and make you look like the best thing on white on rye. And I gotta tell you something, it's starting to look all rye up in here. So with that, we are on to the next one. And I hope that wasn't that bad, y'all. I know that wasn't the perfect Sam Elliott, but it started to get a little bit better, in my opinion, towards the end. So with that, we are on to the next one. I hope you enjoyed that, Kaltenberg, and let's see if they did. Let's see.
All right.
It looks like they got a little chuckle. Yeah, it looks like they got a little chuckle, but we'll move on, and I'll just see it in the live chat later.
All right, and moving right along, we have a $20 super chat from BC Skyman, who says, why hasn't the United States declared Russia a terrorist state? How much do we need to see to make them a candidate?
Actually,
and BC Skyman, before the Enforcer answers that, obviously, we don't delve into politics on the stream, but I do not understand why the individual in charge of our country decided not to do that. It makes absolutely no sense. But just really not delving into politics. I don't care who the president is. If they were Republican or Democrat, that makes no sense not to call them a terrorist state.
1 second, everyone. Let me pull that up. What the hell? Why not? What? That's okay. Now, real quick, I'm gonna, it's really hard to not get into the
Resist the urge, enforcer.
Yeah, it's really hard not to, but that's a stupid call, and I don't care. And like Matthew said, I don't care who is in charge. That's a dumb call to make right there. They are a terrorist state. They've been a terrorist state. It's time to just go ahead and just give it a green light and call them one. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next question. I thank you so much once again for the support, BC Skyman. Of course, you do understand that we don't get into politics here on this channel, but in kind of a rare move, I will commentate on a current political situation in the United States and say that's about one of the stupidest things I've ever seen anyone do in the office of the president, given the current situation and what the Russians are doing in Ukraine. And so we're on to the next one, and thank you once again.
All right, and up next, we have another $50 super chat from Walter A. Lakota Jr., who says, Aloha, Enforcer and Enforcer Matt, it's me again. I would like to clarify that I'm a contracted mariner for MSC, Military Sea Lift Command. I have no military experience. I'm actually a professional mariner. Let's clarify these things.
Oh, well, I'm sorry about that, Walter Lakota. We didn't mean to say that you were in the Navy when you weren't. But still, that's really cool to hear that you are pretty much a professional mariner. That's not a lot of people are in those jobs these days, especially considering the crew that it takes to man merchant ships these days, even of massive size. If you look at the largest ship, well, hell, we won't look at the largest ship. We'll look at the Ever Given, which I think is one of the biggest Ever Given crew size. There are only 25 crew members on the Ever Given. 25. Think about that. This thing is huge. And of course everyone knows the Ever Given. This thing is 1,300 feet long and only has 25 crew members. That puts into perspective how few professional mariners there are in the world, and you are among the rare few who can say that that is their job. And I bet you have a pretty good fun time at it. It seems like whenever I watch videos, which is the closest I can ever get to being a mariner, on YouTube of people who do that as a job, it looks pretty interesting. It does kind of look like it may get a little lonely at times, but still, how neat is it to transport hundreds of thousands of tons of cargo around the world on a single ship with only 25 other people? It's kind of interesting. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support, Walter Lakota, and I thank you so much for clarifying that and also giving us a little bit more information about what specifically you do. It's actually really cool to hear. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the support and allowing us to take a quick little look at what exactly you do. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $12 super chat from Debbie Carvalho, who says, have the Ukraine government found a way to house all the Russian POWs?
I don't really know. We don't really get a lot of information with what Ukrainians do with Russian POWs. So unfortunately, I hate to say this is going to be one of the first times in a long time, I'm going to have to declare ignorance on that one because we just don't have enough information to work off of with what's happening to Russian prisoners in Ukraine. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again for the support, and if we do find any information, we will make sure to put it on the news on the stream and report it. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Ole Wolansky, who says, do you think the idea of the Kharkiv counteroffensive was planned simultaneously as the much-hyped Kherson one, completely and purposely for media purposes, or are there other factors involved?
Right now, I've got to be honest with you, I think the entire Kherson counteroffensive was a ruse for the northeastern counterattack, because it seems like, as of right now, the counterattack in Kherson is dying off very slowly, and Ukrainian forces are disengaging from offensive actions and now starting to retain their static positions in that area. I may be wrong, but that's what it's looking like according to video evidence. Meanwhile, it started up. It was functioning for about a week and a half before the northeastern counteroffensive started. So, and it looked serious. I mean, like, hell, even at the time, they had me fooled because I said, "Why in the world would the Ukrainians go through the effort of destroying all of the crossings across the Dnipro River? This has got to be it." And the Ukrainians even had me fooled, and they actually went for that northeastern attack. And the whole entire time, I was thinking, it's kind of weird, because even though it is to the benefit of the civilians in the area, it was still very weird that the Ukrainians were publicly announcing an oncoming counterattack months in advance and building up to it and hyping it up, and we saw the Russians actually take the bait and start moving tens of thousands of extra soldiers into the area. And then it started. The Ukrainians made a small amount of ground. They took the village of Iskopilya and a couple of others. And then it just stayed that way for a week and a half. The fighting was heavy, but they were making no ground. And then, out of the blue, Balaklia is taken in almost a day. And then almost the entire Kharkiv Oblast falls within the next 3 to 4. And so I think that was almost entirely a ruse to get the Russians to screw themselves over before the Ukrainian northeastern attack began. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, at least in my opinion of what happened. And with that, I thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does answer the question fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Uber Khan, who says, do you that bomb? Hold on a minute here. Let me see what he meant to say. Do you think that bomb on a string is that crazy North Korean tech?
Yes, I do think it is. North Korean tech is some pretty high-end stuff. North Korean equipment.
They went into their secret vault for that one.
They went into the vault for this one. Let me show y'all some of their higher-end equipment. Specifically, does it tell us their aircraft? It doesn't. North Korean.
They're a little secretive over there.
Air Force. They kind of are a little bit, but not enough, because we actually use satellite images to get a good idea of what they have. Also, we can see a North Korean IL-10 right there in the Korean War. But moving on down, let's see what they got. Also, we can see that we listed off all of their air bases, and we can also see what's used at each one. And oh my god, it's a museum. They're using IL-28s, MiG-17s, let's see, a transport wing that doesn't even have any aircraft attached in the footnote. MiG-19s. Let's see, MiG-23s, MiG-15. Let's see, an Mi-2 and one of them, Su-25s, an Su-7, some MiG-29s, and then some very old helicopters, including Mi-8s and Mi-17s, which the Ukrainians are using now. But the other ones, like the Mi-4, let me show you this, Matthew, because this is the definition of a Soviet designer that was suffering in his job and was begging to be killed. This has got to be the ugliest helicopter ever made. This is an Mi-4.
Oh, boy.
Ugh.
Now, Enforcer, he made the design. He was hoping to get put out of his misery, but instead they put it into production.
Oh my god. That's got to be the case. And also another thing that's really stupid about this helicopter, I wish I could show it to you in a better way. Actually, I'll have to use War Thunder's picture because it's the model of the Mi-4. there is a turret down here, and this is the only picture I could find quickly that, well, actually there's this one. There is a turret at the bottom of this helicopter that a poor, unfortunate soldier has to sit in, crouched, like your baby crawling. But imagine being really crouched, and then having to sit on this machine gun, and that's the only weapon on this helicopter. And that guy's in a cramped space. He can't even get out of it the whole flight. He's just stuck in that position. And so if the helicopter crash lands, he's kind of screwed. There's really not an easy way for him to get out of that thing, and he'll probably be crushed. So with that, I hope that kind of talks about the North Koreans and their high-tech. And I would have to say, that is some of that high-tech North Korean stuff that they're going to eventually destroy the West with. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support and the pretty good joke. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from William Arens, who says, Enforcer, do you think that the Ukrainian army will attack the so-called Donetsk PR from the north and the west before the move to take back the areas in the south from Mariupol to Kherson?
I never really want to go into exact Ukrainian battle plans and what I believe about them, because there are some people on YouTube, and I know that whenever I say that, it does sound like a cop-out, and I'm sorry about that, but I always want to make sure that I'm never responsible for Ukrainian soldiers getting killed, and so just in case if I am saying something that will happen, I always want to make sure to avoid that as best as possible. I'll let others out there who seem to care much less about it, I'll let them make that blunder for themselves, but I don't really want to be the one to talk about battle plans and what the Ukrainians will most likely do and where exactly they are, because that could end up with some pretty bad results. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. Unfortunately, I can't really answer that one all too well. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
And up next, we have a question from the Rohala, who puts in a $10 donation and says, "Long live enforcers and NAFO fellas. NAFO expansion is non-negotiable." And that came directly down from Cheems.
And I thank you for the support. Of course, NAFO is a great organization, but I hope that all of the NAFO members consider becoming members of the Lee Spring Army. Maybe we can coexist peacefully. I think man and fish can coexist peacefully, but I think we can coexist peacefully and of course help out in Ukraine and all over the world. That would be a pretty interesting little endeavor to do. And so with that, I hope that addresses the comment fairly well. And thank you so much once again for the support. And of course, huge shout out to all of the viewers from NAFO. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
And up next, we have a $9 super chat from Junebug and also a $5 super chat from Junebug with the 72 at the end. And thank you very much to both of you for the support, and they don't leave comments. And moving right along, we have a $9 super chat once more from Mech Tactical, who says, "What happens to a leaf spring when it is exposed to too much salt? It breaks off the mount and gets wrapped around the axle. That is how cool spring babies are made. Trust me, bro, I'm from Canada."
Well, I thank you for the support. And also, a pretty interesting little addition to Lee Spring Army lore. Also, by the way, y'all, I've been thinking about this, and I think we will make this finalized now. Since about 5,225 of y'all are here, I think this is a good time to say it. We are going to make a Lee Spring Army flag, or the Enforcer flag. However, I want this to be something that's designed by y'all. And so if y'all would like, if you have any kind of experience designing flags, or if not, that's totally fine. Please send your design, if you make one, to my Discord DM, not my email, because I might not see it there. Because usually whenever I just get random emails in my email, I usually don't read them because it's for business. And, and then if I start reading them and responding to people there, then it becomes a place where people go and send messages. And then I never get to see my business emails because they're buried in hundreds of personal messages. So make sure to send it to my Discord DM. But I want y'all to try and design a flag. It can be honey badger based, it can be leaf spring based, but it has to be based around something on this channel. Mostly the images that we have, like the Enforcer, the Leaf Spring Army, like the LSA, the Leaf Spring, or the Honey Badger, or the Leaf Spring and Honey Badger design combined, like we did on a limited edition merch run. Anything y'all can come up with, just send it to me over a Discord DM, and if we get enough of them, we will run a public competition on Discord for which one will win. Of course, we'll pick the semifinalists, and y'all pick out the semifinalists which one will win, and then that will become the flag of the Lee Spring Army and the Enforcer channel. And so with that, we are now going to be moving on into the next question. I hope that addressed that one fairly well, and thank you so much once again for the support.
And here's my question, folks. Should we open up a dedicated, merch idea section on Discord? For literally anybody that has an idea for merch can literally just put their design into the Discord channel. That seems it'd be pretty cool to me. What do you think, Enforcer?
I think that would be pretty cool, and I think we might have to work on that.
Yes, we might.
Now, one thing
yes.
I was thinking though, real quick, Canva. Let's see here. Create a design, YouTube thumbnail. So one thing I was thinking about a design is to take, and this is just my idea, black flag with, just to make it simple. This is one of my ideas. Y'all don't have to work off of this. Let's see. Let me make sure it's using the right font.
Fat. Pick that one. This is fat.
Fat? Wait, where was that one? Fat.
It says fat with a double T.
This is like some 1980s stuff.
What are we supposed to be, pirates?
I don't know. But I like this one. This one's a pretty good little text font design. Just make it something like that. But that's a little too simple to me. But it does kind of remind me of those simpler battle flags from some countries. I'm trying to think of which ones they were. But still, kind of an interesting design. But design whatever y'all want. It's y'all's creative license. Y'all do what you wish. Just send it to me over my Discord DM, which is what Matthew and me are on a call on right now. So make sure just to get yourself a Discord account, join our server, and then find me and DM me the flag design.
Enforcer, I just saw people saying that's funny. That flag kind of resembles a organization that operates out the Middle East.
Oh no, it wasn't supposed to. That's not the goal at all. But with that, I hope I hope that kind of addresses the flag thing a little bit. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Redwood Beard, who does not leave a comment, but Redwood Beard, that's somewhat of a tongue twister there. He's been around for a very long time as well, and we appreciate your support and your long viewership as well. And Enforcer, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, I would. I would love to thank you so much for the support. It, of course, helps us to keep our tummies full, our minds ready to go, and of course, the coffee flowing down our throats. So I gotta thank you so much for the support, as it's helping us to keep this stream running. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And up next, we have a question from Robbie140, who says, where do you see this conflict going? Will Russia collapse or use some sort of nuclear weapon against Ukraine, including the Zaporizhzhia power plant, RTR?
I think I see this war going in the direction of the Ukrainians eventually reclaiming their land and the Russians piecing out, or trying to keep Crimea and them piecing out. That's kind of the way I see it going. I don't see anything extreme happening. I know that a lot of people are always focusing on the extreme, but I just want to remind you real quick of all the extremes that were supposed to have happened in this war so far, but they didn't. The May 9th Victory Day parade. That's going to be when Putin comes out and he's going to say that it's a full-on war. He's going to send the whole military in and everyone's going to die. Didn't happen. The Ukrainian Independence Day. The Russians are getting geared up. They're going to start rolling across the border everywhere, including Poland. They're going to just defeat Ukraine because it's Ukrainian Independence Day and they got to make something significant happen. That didn't happen either. Nothing major happens in real life most of the time, and I usually work off of what normally happens, as a historical basis. And so I don't think anything drastic will be done. The Ukrainians will eventually reclaim their land. It'll be an embarrassing defeat for the Russians, and they may survive with the skin of their teeth. And so with that, I hope that answers the question, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
Now, see, folks, I am learning a little bit of something in my college classes, believe it or not. And what the Enforcer ascribes to is the rational model of decision-making in foreign policy. Now, I would have to disagree with him, because I think you have to take psychology into account. And with somebody like Putin that is a dictator and answers to basically no one, I would say it's not too far out of the league to say that he might use a nuclear weapon. Now, I know the Enforcer is going to disagree with that, but we have to factor in that he's a nut.
Oh, that's true. He is a nut, but at the same time, almost every Soviet premier, except for Gorbachev, was a nut. Yet they didn't do anything insane. So, I'm trying to go off a historical basis here. And, once again, we'll just see as time goes by. We'll see if it does go upside down, or if it just kind of evolves naturally and ends kind of like history would suggest it in. But who knows? You may be right. I may be right. Or we both may be wrong. Who knows? But with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Suzanne B, who says, the Russians confuse respect with fear.
I think they do. And I honestly have to say, I think that's a bit of a cultural thing in Russia. They almost always think of fear as respect. You can see that even with how their government operates and treats their civilians. They think that if they instill fear in the population, that's respect, and that's the way to run the government. That's almost always how it's been run. And we can see Gorbachev was viewed as a weak leader. Although he ended the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union, I guess you could say, was the most free it ever was, if it ever was free, under Gorbachev's reign than any. And he, even now, was viewed as a weak leader because he didn't make the people fear him, which in Russia, I guess, is the equivalent of respect. So in that regard, I would have to agree with you completely. That's something that you can historically see throughout all of Russia's history. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Christy M, who says, how do you think Russia's active military soldiers will be compared to the conscripts that they have been using?
Can you reread that one again real quick?
Yes. How do you think Russia's active military soldiers will be compared to the conscripts that they've been using?
Russia's been using contract soldiers during this entire war, and so if they send in anything else that's different, it's going to be conscripts that are still picking boogers out of their nose, and they're going to get obliterated by Ukrainian artillery. So with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well. But so far, the Russians have sworn that all of the soldiers being used in Ukraine are contract soldiers and not normal conscripts, although there has been a couple that we've seen. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again for the support, and I hope that answers the question fairly well.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Wojtek CYVR, who says, if America did not give Russians help during World War II, they will never arrived in Berlin. Also, Stalin had a set of special forces who will shoot those who are retreating. The only way was forward.
And I thank you for the support. That is actually something that was, to address something real quick. These special units you're talking about are NKVD screening units, and they didn't really do that. That's actually a misrepresentation of Soviet Order number 227.
How do you know that off the top of your head?
Well, I mean, I just do.
Order number 227 exactly.
I just, I'm just that way. I'm sorry, everyone. It's just how I am. But anyways, Soviet Order number 227. Let's go down to the specific articles. So here we go. It goes on to state that the Supreme General Headquarters of the Red Army commands: 1. Military councils of the front and first of all front commanders should unconditionally eliminate retreat moods in the troops and with firm hand bar propaganda that we can and should retreat further east, and such retreat will cause no harm. Unconditionally remove from their posts and send to high command for court-martial those army commanders who have allowed unauthorized troop withdrawals from occupied positions without the order from the front command. C. From within, form within each front from 1 up to 3, depending on the situation, penal battalions, 800 persons each, where commanders and high commanders and appropriate commissars of all service arms who have been guilty of a breach of discipline due to cowardice or bewilderment will be sent and put them on more difficult sectors of the front to give them an opportunity to redeem by blood their crimes against the motherland. We can see here that in this first article, all of this is directed not at the normal soldiers of the Russian military, but at the officers and their command. It was the officers' responsibility under Soviet Order number 227 to ensure that their units do not retreat further. This order wasn't really taken out against the enlisted. It was taken out against the officers because in case if y'all don't know, going into a decent amount of Soviet military history, just years prior to the Second World War, Stalin went through and conducted the Great Purge, which was pretty much the execution of all of the experienced officers in the Russian military, save a few. And all of these experienced officers were then replaced by yes-men who had absolutely no idea what they were doing. And so when Operation Barbarossa began, the Soviet military was overwhelmed by the swift German advance that was occurring in front of them, and a lot of them were being encircled, surrounded, and then a load of them literally just got on the road and started going east, and they almost never stopped. That's why the Germans were able to make so much ground in the first year of the war. And so Soviet Order number 227 was written up in response to these officers continuing to tell their units to just keep going east. It's fine. There's loads of land. We can just keep on winning this war if we just go east. We'll eventually find a great defensive position, and we'll fight there. And so that's what this whole entire order was addressed to. It wasn't really, it isn't anything like Enemy at the Gates shows where they start running back across the square and the NKVD screening unit just starts mowing them down. That NKVD screening unit in real life would have gone, hey, y'all aren't supposed to be retreating. Why is your officer allowing you to retreat? And if the unit was just going into a straight up route and the officer was not allowing them to retreat, it wouldn't really be taken out on that officer. That's usually historically how it turned out. But if the officer went, oh, we're in a tough bind, everyone run back, then they would go, no, your whole unit is going right back up where it came from. And if that officer refused, the NKVD screening unit would take him and then throw him into a penal battalion. And then, if they even did worse in the penal battalion, then they'd execute him. So that's how the Soviet Order number 227 worked. And also, someone said that makes no sense. Look, I'm not the one who explains how Order number 227 works. That's just how it worked. I've researched that a lot years ago, and that's exactly what happened. I mean,
if it was done by the Russians, it's not supposed to make sense.
Yeah, the Russians don't make sense. So with that, I hope that explains Soviet Order number 227, because while that is somewhat true, it is a little bit more of a exaggeration of historical fact. But moving on from that, can you reread the first part of that question so that way I can make sure to answer it?
And so the first part said, if America did not give Russians help during World War II, they will never have arrived in Berlin. Also, Stalin had a set of special forces who will shoot those who are retreating.
And also, speaking of the Lend-Lease, that is entirely true about the Lend-Lease. If it wasn't for the United States providing Studebaker trucks, the Russians would have never gotten off the ground. In fact, once again, let's go through a rabbit hole, because this is about the best one tonight, because it's history-based, and I know a decent amount about history. So, Russian truck production. World War II. So, Soviet Union, the Red Army in 1941 had around 270,000 trucks and received another 745,000 during the war. Out of these, 150,000 were new domestic production, 221,500 trucks drafted from the industry and agricultural sectors, 60,600 of them were captured enemy trucks, and a whopping, the majority, the largest portion of the trucks that they would get over the course of the Second World War were Lend-Lease trucks from the United States. 312,600 of them. That means that the Lend-Lease outproduced trucks by a factor of 2 that the Russians produced over the course of the entire war. And it gives you an idea of how small Russia's industrial base really was, because they were putting their maximum effort into producing both infantry tanks, smaller tanks, I guess you could say, like BT-7s, T-70s, T-80s, because there were those in the Second World War. They were little light tanks, and also T-34 85s and T-34s, which would become incredibly prevalent later on in the war. But they also spent a decent amount of effort trying to produce trucks, and over the course of 3 years, and really more like 4 years, they were only able to produce 150,000 of them, and the United States shipped 312,000 of them to the Soviet Union, and then still produced enough trucks that there was a surplus of trucks when the United States was fighting in North Africa, Italy, and France. Now, that's unbelievable to really think about how large the U.S. industrial base was even then. But with that, I hope that addresses that question fairly well, because if it wasn't for those 312,000 trucks that we sent over to the Soviet Union during the Second World War, their logistics would have been shot like they are now. They never learned, and they would have lost. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the support.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Fife, who says Germany is also sending 2 Mars MLRS and 50 dingoes.
Really? That's really nice of the Germans. They've been sending some nice stuff, but it hasn't seemed like a massive number. But it's good to know that they're going to be sending 2 Mars, which are the M270s of the German army, and also dingoes, which are a pretty cool armored car. And so with that, thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address the question or the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from James Dunn, who says Greece actually meets NATO standards of 2% GDP to its military spending, alongside Poland and the US. I don't think the others do.
I think France. And what was the specific statement there?
He said that Greece actually meets NATO standards of 2% GDP.
On like defense spending?
Yes.
France, defense spending, GDP.
And it's Greece.
Yes, I'm just making sure, because he said that it was only Greece, Poland, and the United States that kept up to their GDP percentage. But it looks like here France would as well. I believe the British would. UK defense spending. They spend 2% of their GDP on defense. I believe the Germans do as well. Let's see. Oh, for some reason the Germans aren't a quick one to find. Let's see. They actually. Oh, well, actually that's the U.S., but I can't find a quick number on the Germans. The Germans apparently are reported at 1.3%, 1.4% really. But it looks like there are some other countries out there, like the French and the British, who do spend at least a minimum of 2% of their GDP per year on defense spending. And so with that, I hope that addresses this comment fairly well. But The Greeks, although a somewhat poorer nation nowadays than they have been times before, they're still a pretty neat country, and I do respect them. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again for the support.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from James Lynn, who says Ukraine captured a Russian sailor Baltic fleet the other day who only had 1 week of tank training. Russian Navy has been gutted for cannon fodder.
Well, that's neat to know, and it's also pretty crazy to think that you got some guy, in case of y'all don't know, Russian sailor. Oh, God. Got some guy looking like a cartoon getting captured. Oh, I just learned how to drive tank 1 week ago. I gotta say,
I wouldn't want to see these guys in an alley, to be totally honest.
I gotta tell you, these guys kind of look scary. They, I don't know,
Sketchy at least.
Yeah, they look a little sketch. I'd be scared to see these kinds of guys in an alley because that uniform doesn't do them any good. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again for the support, and also thank you for sharing that information with us because I had not heard about that. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next, I want to recognize a $10 super chat from Little Jams. Thank you so much for the support, and we appreciate you very much. And moving right along, we have a $5 super chat.
I like how you cut out the middle part of their name. I just saw it. I was like, I see why he cut it out.
Yes, so we're going to call him Little Jam. All right, and moving right along, we have a $5 super chat from AK Smithy, who says, I came up with an online scream name for Putin, the Kremlin Gremlin.
Well, we've seen that one around, actually. I think we've seen Kremlin Gremlin in our chat before, and that was a pretty good one. I like that name. That's a pretty apt description of what Putin is, a Kremlin Gremlin. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address the comment. And with that, we are on to the next one. And also, Matthew, I'd like to make a quick note about Little Jam, that he's using the chicken from Chicken Little as his profile picture.
Let's see. Oh, he sure is.
Yeah,
that old-fashioned animation.
Yeah, you know, the one where the turkey went, you have that, you know, like that one.
How long ago was that movie made?
Oh, man, let's pull it up, actually. Chicken Little. 2005.
That long ago.
Jeez.
That's crazy. I remember that from childhood.
Yeah, that was actually, that's one of the more memorable movies I remember watching. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, a big shout out to William Jones and Colleen Emsley for putting in a $5 donation each, but without a comment. But thank you very much to both of you for your support. And moving right along, we have a $5 donation from Test Eagle, who says Coffee Fund. Hope you guys have had a chance to try Malaysia's margarine roasted coffee beans. Now, September 16th is Malaysia. Please give a shout out to my fellow Malaysian watching the stream.
Hey, well, I thank you for the support, and also, huge shout out to Malaysia, which is a really interesting place. And since you shouted out Malaysia, we're going to drop down in celebration of it into Kuala Lumpur and take a look at what it looks like. I've never really looked here before, so boop. Interesting. 1 second, we're going to hop out of here. I don't know where the downtown would be in Kuala Lumpur. It's not here. Well, maybe. I don't know. Where in the world is the... Oh, here's the Twin Towers. There we go. This is downtown. So we'll drop down here. Wow, actually, this is pretty nice in the center. I will admit, it was looking a little bit sketch on that one place that we dropped down in, but I was like, that isn't downtown. But this is downtown, and this does look pretty nice, actually. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. Huge shout out to Malaysia. Pretty interesting country, actually. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running.
All right, and next up, we have a $4 super chat from CA Lags, who says Kherson was a bear trap. Russia could use a good impaling.
And I will agree with both of those statements, and I do believe that Kherson was a bit of a ruse or a trap, if you'd like to call it that. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, and with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $3 super chat from Wojtek CYVR, once again, who says, I wouldn't be surprised of Russians who are here, the West or America, and are simply spies of Putler.
That's always something that a lot of people say about, I guess you could say, foreigners, especially when you're on hostile terms, is that they may be spies, and you know that's a pretty decent that's a pretty decent argument right there, is that some of these Russians may be spies. But then again, it's going to be really hard for some of them to spy when they go up like Chekhov in Star Trek and go, do you know what the American vessels are? Because then everyone's going to be like, wait a minute, this guy is not from here. But with that, I thank you so much for the support, and it is a decent concern that people should look into. And with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And next up, big shout out to YJOV Ian, who puts in a $5 donation, but without a comment, and sends us the pair jumping around, lifting some dumbbells, saying keep it up, and it's sweating profusely. But thank you very much for the support, and we appreciate it very much. And up next, we have a $10 super chat from WL, who says, thank you guys for continuing to support Ukraine. Why doesn't the U.S. send more HIMARS systems or M1 tanks to Ukraine?
I'm not entirely sure. I think it may just be that the next shipment has not been, I guess you could say, manifested to then be sent to Poland. But I'm not entirely sure. I don't really know the exact details as to why we haven't sent more over. It may be because we have sent as many as the Ukrainians could possibly use. And we're just waiting for maybe a rare casualty to take place, like another HIMARS being lost, and then send them a replacement for it. But I'm not entirely sure, so it's all really guesswork on my end at this point. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again for the support.
And next up, we have a $5 super chat from Kevin Scott 76, who continues his grandpa's World War II story. He says, August 26, 1945, he wrote home from Laupertheim, Germany. There are a lot of Russian DPs, displaced persons, working here.
Laupertheim, Germany. Where would that be? Laupertheim. Let's see, it was spelled
like Laupertime.
Laupertheim, Germany. Maybe it was rewritten sometime around. Because I can't find Laupertheim, Germany.
Man, that was so long ago. They've erased the place.
They have obliterated that place. But I can't unfortunately find it to see where it is in Germany. But I'm assuming it would most likely be in East Germany, because that would be the easiest place to transport him to. But with that, I hope that answers the question. Addresses the comment fairly well. And thank you once again, Kevin Scott 76, for sharing a little bit of your family member's story with us. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
All right, and up next, we have a $3 super chat from AK Smithy, once again, who says, you need to look at Starsky's recent short clips. Seriously, you do. And AK Smithy, we actually have looked at his short clips. They're really funny and are actually really original, too. And there's something about, like, the Ukrainians. They're really good at comedy. Look at Zelenskyy. He had a really good comedy career before he became president. And even Starsky is a really good comedian, too.
And I honestly have to say, they're just awful. I'm just kidding. They're actually really good. I have watched some. And I have to say, Starsky went from just covering the war to now he started to flesh out his channel a little bit more and show a bit more of his personality. And honestly, I think it's done a great service to his channel. I think it makes it a lot more interesting. And he does very good skits. I like them a lot. And so with that, I hope that addresses the comment fairly well, and thank you so much for the support. Also, real quick, y'all, I know that some people are saying play it on stream. Now, Starsky and me, we know each other, but the YouTube algorithm does not know that, and so if I showed one of his clips completely uninterrupted on my stream, they could content ID it, and I could get in a lot of trouble for that. So unfortunately, I cannot play it on stream, but you can go over to Operator Starsky's channel and check it out for yourself. And so with that, and also, that's a view for him, because if I showed it on my stream, it's a view for me. If you go over there, he gets views, and of course, that helps him out. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And up next, we have a $3 super chat from Not a Channel, who says, just seeing if I can get Enforcer Matt to read, I'm too sexy for my shirt, so sexy it hurts. Worthy use of $5.
Wait a minute, what?
Huh?
What?
He said, worthy use of $5 to get me to say that.
Huh, and for some reason, I'm not really following this.
He's trying to get me to say that line, and I don't want to say it again, Enforcer. You're trying to goat me into saying it again.
all right. So, thank you for the support. I hope that does address the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $20 super chat from Cliff Bro, who does not leave a comment, but thank you very much, Cliff, for the support. And we know you've been around for quite some time, so we appreciate it very much.
Cliff Bro is wearing the wrong flip-flops on the wrong shoes in that profile picture. Did you see that?
That's the whole point. That's the whole point. He's a rebel.
He's a rebel. He's a rebel. And with that, we are on to the next one. And also, thank you so much for the support, Cliff Bro. You have been around forever, and also that's a pretty funny profile picture. I like it. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $5 super chat from Robin M, who says, thinking of all the animals in the zoo's safety and tank skies.
And also, thank you so much once again for the support, Robin M. You too are one of the old guard members. And also, it is always interesting to think about the animals in the zoos. Like if we remember, the Kyiv Zoo actually was the spot of a firefight at the time, and I wonder how the animals fared at that zoo and if they're okay now. I'm not entirely sure, but I do know that the tarpons and other kinds of animals that were in the Kharkiv Zoo were evacuated, and none of them suffered any injuries or harm, which is a good thing to think about. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the support.
And up next, we have a $2 super chat from Marcel Bruin, who says, AI that's left is made in China. Thanks, Ukraine.
Well, I thank you for the support. I don't know exactly what that's talking about, but thank you once again. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $3 super chat from Not a Channel once again. He says, and this one is to apologize for the last one. And Not a Channel, I do try to be a good sport. I saw what you said in the live chat as well. And pretty good one. It seems like everybody was on a roll on having to say we're too sexy for things tonight. I think, what was it, Kaltenberg put in the other one?
Yes, Kaltenberg was the one who put in the first one. And then I read it off as Sam Elliott, and then apparently that just started off the chain reaction from there.
All right. But anyways, thank you, Not a Channel, for the support. And yes, it is good to be a good sport sometimes. But anyways, up next, we have a $3 super chat from Felix, who says, thank God America is here to keep these whack jobs from nuking their way to victory. Slava Ukraine. God bless America.
And Vichna Slavializim, Slava Ukraini. And also to address that, it's a good thing that the U.S. is here with its bristling, I guess you could say, nuclear-tipped weapons, because if it wasn't for those, then the Russians could just try and strong-arm their way through. However, I do think that the British and the French would have a problem with that, and they, too, also have nuclear weapons. It's just that it's not as many as the United States. I think the British have around 200-something, the French have around 400, but still, that doesn't even get close to the thousands that the U.S. has. So with that, I hope that does address the comment fairly well, and thank you so much once again for the support.
And next up, we have a $2 super chat from Dupper Bob and Junebug again. And thank you very much to both of you for your support. And for the final super chat of the night, we have a $2 donation from Chris Webb, who says Coffee Fund.
And thank you so much for the support of the Coffee Fund, Chris Webb. It helps us to keep drinking that coffee, if you don't know. And so with that, I hope I've addressed that comment fairly well. And thank you so much once again for the support. And so with that, we are now going to answer live chat questions for the next 10 minutes. And then we'll be rounding out tonight's stream. And so with that, on to the first one.
And the first live chat question goes to Colorado Cat, who says, is it possible that the Ukrainians squirreled away some nukes in the 90s?
Unfortunately, no. That wouldn't be possible because there are nuclear regulatory inspectors that made sure that all of the nukes that they inherited were accounted for. So there's not really a lot of room for, I guess you could say, slippage there where a nuke just ends up in hiding. And also the logistical infrastructure needed to maintain a nuke makes it obvious that there is one there. That's why whenever the Iranians appear to start working on nuclear weapons, we already know about it because the traces of nuclear activity going on somewhere are pretty clear and very evident once you start to see the pieces fall together. So unfortunately, they didn't. So I hope that answers the question fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, actually, I forgot to call it out earlier. Hopefully WF2U and Mark Hodges is still here. They did figure out the Morse code tonight, and I didn't put my usual orange color on the chat. So it got mixed up in the live chat. So sorry, WF2U and Mark Hodges, I have let you down. But anyways, they say, Enforcer, tonight's Morse code plain language message, no decoding. If you or a loved one has been diagnosed with mesothelioma, Slava Ukraine, and here I'm Slava.
And that is correct. If you or a loved one has been diagnosed with mesostugnaloma, you may be entitled to financial compensation. Many people were exposed to that's so hard to say, mesostugnaloma when in the Ukrainian fields, Ukrainian towns, and Ukrainian cities. If you have been in any of these areas and you are suffering from mesostugnaloma, you may be entitled to financial compensation. Please call now. And I hope y'all have enjoyed that very butchered tele-ad right there. And thank you so much to both of y'all once again for deciphering that Morse code, because I think we haven't read that off for a night or two in a row now. So I'm glad we were able to get to it tonight, and I hope that addressed it fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and also, folks, you know the commercial that has gotten even more annoying than the mesothelioma commercials are the Camp Lejeune commercials that are coming on like every other minute now.
And also,
if you or a loved one would like to file a claim for Camp Lejeune, Clamp Lejeune, what am I talking about?
Clanton. But anyways, moving on to talk about that commercial. That one is really annoying because they sit there and this time they got like the ominous looking background, the music, and then some Marines doing jumping jacks on kind of like a faded edit, you know, and they're sitting there, at Camp Lejeune, there was toxic water. It's almost like that Thoughty 2 guy, or no, not Thoughty 2. It's that guy who sits there on YouTube. He's like, number 57, contaminated water. You know, it's almost like they have that narrator doing the thing for the ad there, and I'm just not a big fan of that one. That one is more annoying than mesothelioma, honestly. So with that, we are now moving on to the next question.
And I saw Kaltenberg say he's never been a fan of the ability to advertise lawsuits. And yeah, it's insane how many attorneys have tried to like pile on to the Camp Lejeune claim thing. And there's even attorneys that are putting like subsequent commercials out to say, don't get confused by that other advertising, call me. And they have to walk a really fine line because they can't say certain things and say that they're better than other attorneys and stuff like that. But yeah, just annoying overall. And I saw somebody say clamp legume. And that's what I did say earlier, wasn't it?
Yeah, we're clamping them legumes. And so with that, we're on to the next
All right. And up next, we have a question from Lars Andrews, who says, I have an important question. What is Ukraine doing about the reclaimed borders to their country? Are they digging a huge moat or adding a double electrified fence?
Well, they just secure them and that's it. They haven't, from what we know, they haven't done anything to modify the borders at all. They just push the Russians back across them. The Russians don't come back, and the border guards then just guard the border. So that's all we know for now. I may be wrong, but that's what we've seen so far. And so with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Carmen V, who says, do you know if there are any charities providing generators to Ukraine? Winter is coming, after all, you know.
Everyone keeps on saying that line, winter is coming. And it honestly, it's starting to get weird sounding. It doesn't even sound like an English phrase anymore. It's almost like a jargle of noises to me now, because man, they'll be talking about, has anyone sent generators to Ukraine? And then I just hear, when are coming? You know, it's just stopped meaning anything to me. It's just a phrase. But
Enforcer, you know what that makes me think of when I hear people say winter is coming? It reminds me of that Disney little like cartoon, the really old one, of the grasshopper and the ants, and they was like dying to get inside, knocking on the door and stuff.
Okay, not gonna lie, Maddie, I know exactly what you're talking about. Didn't the soup, when the ants were giving the grasshopper soup, wasn't that soup like the most enticing, most delicious looking soup? I don't know why, but it was. It was like, I don't know why cartoons can make food and like non-food items look so delicious. For some reason, they just can. But
those old Disney cartoons are just like excellent.
Yeah, and I really liked the short stories they would tell through them. And also another good one was the Jack and the Beanstalk stories, if you remember that one, Matthew, where they bought the bean,
yes.
and they were cutting the bread so thin it was like transparent. Like that was a really good one too.
That's back when Mickey Mouse was a savage.
Yeah, and also that one I'm talking about, the Jack and the Beanstalk one. I believe that was part of a little like special that was made called Fun and Fancy Free. So
yes.
I'm sure a lot of my older viewers will know exactly what I'm talking about. But if you're one of my younger viewers, it is something interesting to go take a look at. You know, if you're just into Disney cartoons, it's really good. But anyways, with that, I think to answer the question, I think there are countries, or the Ukrainian government is looking into generators to try and provide power, but I don't really know about that one all too well. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And with that, I hope I was able to answer that question a little.
All right. And moving on to the next one, it looks like this might be our second to last question of the night, which goes to Kellen Hansen. He says, do you think it would be possible for drones to drop anti-propaganda info, example, Izyum mass grave, war crimes, etc., onto Russian cities?
They could, but the question would be, the drones that have that kind of range are most likely more expensive. Is it worth the risk of losing more expensive drones to try and drop leaflets that may have no real effect? And so with that, I hope that kind of addresses at least the concern I would have if I'm trying to undergo that expedition. And we are on to the next one.
And up next, and I think this is going to be our final question of the night, is it, Enforcer?
Actually, we're going to address that super chat, and then we'll address one more question for the night.
All right, so this super chat is from Colleen Emsley, who puts in a $15 donation and says, thanks for your coverage of the horrific war on our beloved Ukrainian people. Been watching from Calling Lake, Alberta since you started. Great work, guys.
And thank you so much for the support, Colleen Emsley. I think it's the correct way to pronounce that last name. It, of course, helps our channel to keep running, so that way we can keep on covering this war day by day. And also, I thank you so much for enjoying our coverage. I try my best to make sure that we tell the story of what's going on in Ukraine every single day the best we can, and of course provide as much support as physically possible, at least within our bounds. And I'm glad that you've been enjoying it, and I thank you so much for helping to continue to keep this fire burning, so that way we can continue to keep running these streams so people can enjoy them until the very end of this war. And so with that, we are now moving on to the last question of the night. And so who is the lucky last person who threw in the lucky last question of the night?
All right, and that viewer is the Beezer. He says, do you think it's possible that some of these vehicles are laced with some kind of slow-acting poison? And I'm talking about the vehicles that were left behind by the Russians that the Ukrainians have taken over.
No. That would be far too much effort for a normal Russian. Everyone's always trying to come up with something where it's like, haha, the Russians actually had a plan here. They left the tank behind because it has a tracker on it, or it's poisoned or something. Nah, these Russian conscripts are far too stupid for anything like that. And of course, I'm not trying to underestimate them or anything, but they are. And so they're just leaving them, that's why the Ukrainians just, you can watch them. They'll drop a bomblet near a tank, it blows up, and then the crew just hops out and runs and just leaves the tank there intact. So it's nothing that has a deeper meaning or an intricate plan behind it. It's just Russian conscripts, just normal, I guess you could say, high school graduates that you would see, anywhere in the world. They get scared and they hop out of a tank and run off and just leave it there intact. So with that, I hope that answers the question fairly well. And with that, we have reached the end of tonight's stream. I thank you all so much once again for watching. It has been an absolute pleasure to cover the news with each and every one of y'all tonight. And of course, if you did enjoy and you have not subscribed, please make sure to. We run these streams every single day of the week at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, except for Mondays because we take that day off. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 24 hours of the war in Ukraine. Thank you all, and I'll see you then. Good night, and take care.